Hey y'all, Scott here. I've been doing a lot of thinking about myself, figuring out who I am, what I was meant to do. The one thing I can do that nobody else can. It's blowing up garbage. It's already been done.
If there's one thing I want playing Game Boy, it's restraint. I can do that myself. Handheld gaming has always been one of the most popular forms of gaming, but it just can't accomplish what a home console can. More powerful hardware, better feeling control. While handhelds have their place, some games just work better on console. Thus, many portable exclusives got repackaged for a home release. Case in point, Secret Agent Clank. I'm not playing that out there. I had always dreamed of a handheld capable of console experiences all my life. And in 2005, all my prayers were answered with the PlayStation Portable, the fabled home console to go. Finally. The PSP was pretty damn close to a PlayStation 2 quality-wise. I mean, it wasn't as good, but on a screen as small as this, it can be hard to tell. But because of the comparisons one can make between PS2 and PSP games, numerous PS2-era series made the jump to portables with the PSP. Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter each got exclusive entries on this little guy and played very similarly to their home console counterparts. Series like Grand Theft Auto, however, already had pre-existing examples of handheld entries. Grand Theft Auto, Liberty City Stories, and Vice City Stories. Two original GTA titles exclusively for the PSP. That is incredible and something you just don't see these days. It would be one thing to play Grand Theft Auto 3 on the go, but to play a game on par with Grand Theft Auto 3 on the go, that's an original game to boot. I mean, with how expensive game development is these days, they would have just put any old GTA game on the PSP, which makes Liberty City and Vice City Stories that much more special to me. The first time we were finally able to play 3D Grand Theft Auto on the go, and they were totally unique adventures. For 8 months! Yes, the great PSP to PS2 migration. Because of how similar games looked on both platforms, the PSP was great for PS2 games to run on it, and vice versa. It's surprising just how many PSP exclusives made their way over to the PS2, considering how this was a few years into the PlayStation 3's life. Hey, never underestimate how well the PS2 sold. With an installed base of over 150 million systems, you'd be stupid not to be stupid. It's supporting the PlayStation 2 without actually supporting the PlayStation 2. You can finally let your neighbors know you're playing Secret Agent Clank without solicitation. These games came to PSP first, later coming to PS2, which happened mostly later in the system's life, with games like Siphon Filter Logan Shadow releasing on the platform as late as 2010. That was the year God of War 3 released. Like, Jesus Christ. But you know, Sony, I have to give you credit. Ford won't service my Model T anymore, and you know damn well they wouldn't release Secret Agent Clank for it either. Well, let's take a look at some of these PSP to PS2 conversions. The Grand Theft Auto games were some of the earliest ones, with Liberty City Stories releasing on the PSP in October of 2005 and later on the PS2 in June of 2006. It's a more than serviceable GTA game on both platforms, though a few features were cut from the PS2 version. There's no multiplayer and no custom soundtracks. You can't play your own music like you can on the PSP. There's also no snow on the PS2 version of one specific mission. PlayStation 2 release does look nicer with higher quality graphics, textures, effects, the works. Though it does look more dull to me, but that could be the realism taking over. The PS2 game looks better, and by better, I mean fucking depressing. It's nowhere near as good looking as Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. It's still the same PSP game at its core, which you have to get used to with conversions like this. A jump from handheld to console truly does outline how these games aren't nearly as impressive when played at home on the big screen. Sure, it looks nicer now, but I can't take it on the go anymore, so now there's not as much of an excuse why the fingers do what the fingers want. Yeah, the game looks more realistic now. I'm also legally blind. Liberty City Stories was only $20 on PlayStation 2 at launch though, half the PSP version's price due to cutting multiplayer in the custom soundtracks, which made this an absolute bargain. I mean, we haven't even covered the mere fact that the game controls leagues better here than on PSP simply due to the second analog stick and a set of shoulder buttons. Have you ever played a PSP game?
Yeah, you have. You've cried.
The stuff you're willing to put up with for the sake of portability. I mean, it's far from unplayable. Hell, it's damn near tolerable. But having to stop and hold the left shoulder button to move the camera can be brutally annoying. The PS2 version is far more comfortable to play in this regard, but it's not nearly as enjoyable. I'm gonna be honest, most AAA PSP exclusives like this, their charm comes from the fact they're on the PSP. They're good games at their core, but when you put them on something like a PS2, a lot of that magic is lost for me. They may play and look better, but Liberty City Stories was always meant to be a portable, traditional GTA game. So when you take away the portability, it's still good, but you just get this feeling when you're playing it on PS2.
I should have finished high school.
Liberty City Stories is better on PS2. Play it on PSP. It plays fine on the go, and this was where it was meant to be played, plus it's still a huge novelty playing games like this on a system this tiny. Playing on the PS2, you'll be asking yourself why you aren't just playing San Andreas. And the same goes for the game's sequel, Vice City Stories, released on PSP in October of 2006 and PS2 in March of 2007. Multiplayer on PSP, cut from PS2, though the PS2 version received exclusive bonus content. Pretty minor stuff, but stuff nonetheless. Couple that with better visuals and controls, and you also have the better version of Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories, the worst one. You can make that argument about most PSP to PS2 games. For example, MotorStorm Arctic Edge, PSP in September of 2009, PS2 in October of 2009. Jesus, Sony, let me blink! MotorStorm was a graphical showcase on PlayStation 3. The mud effects, the car crashes, the lighting, all in glorious HD. While the game itself was fun, you are more than likely buying it to look at something. Arctic Edge was the PSP's entry in the series, and for the PSP, this is great. And the PS2, however, like, man, this is the screen I play MotorStorm on. Don't show this. The graphical downgrade is far more welcome on the handheld. On TV, like, we already had 2 MotorStorm games in HD before this. The series was born in HD, and you think this is going to be exciting? While it does have split-screen multiplayer unlike the PSP version, it does lack the online multiplayer, the photo mode, the custom soundtracks. Arctic Edge on PS2 isn't bad, but its existence is far more questionable than the PSP release. Yes, PS2 owners in 2009 deserved a fun racing game, because I'm scared what they'd do if they weren't kept busy. But it just feels weird to play this game on my TV when it's technically newer than this game. Twisted Metal Head-On at least took much longer to come to PlayStation 2, with the PSP version releasing in March of 2005 as a launch title for the handheld, and the PS2 version coming out in February of 2008. Subtitled Extra Twisted Edition, this is up. This feels much more natural to me than MotorStorm on PS2. I mean, there was no Twisted Metal on PS3 at the time, and as Twisted Metal Black was one of the first major games on the console, this felt like a fitting swan song for the PlayStation 2. 5 years later, Head-On Extra Twisted Edition is amazing. It can almost be considered a new game with the amount of content added. Sure, online multiplayer was taken out, but in its place are all kinds of doodads, a new level, an entirely separate mode with stages from a canceled sequel to Twisted Metal Black. Being able to play as the Twisted Metal mascot Sweet Tooth outside of the car, which was a first for the series. Bonus footage, including a documentary and cut endings for the first Twisted Metal. Like, oh my god, this made the jump to console with pride. And this made it out of spite. I'm bending the rules with this one a bit. Hopefully the government follows suit. I'd marry this game just to put it through divorce. Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier was released for PSP and PS2 on the exact same day, but you can't fool me. This was always a PlayStation portable game, and they just put it out on PS2 at the last minute, because without the PS2 version releasing, well, let's thank God it did. This is just one of those PSP entries in a franchise. You know the ones. Oh, this doesn't matter to the core story. Oh, it's made by a B-team developer, not the original developer of the series. Oh, it's a handheld, so who gives a shit? And what's worse about it, this isn't even a good one of those games. The Lost Frontier suffers from just being directionless, putting the series into the hands of people who had no idea how to extend the franchise past the original trilogy on PlayStation 2, both gameplay and story-wise. Which is what's so insulting about this one, the fact that it's on PS2 right next to the rest of them. If it was a PSP exclusive, I don't think it would be nearly as offensive, like, oh, it's just a little handheld spin-off. No, you can play this below a ceiling. It's fucking scary. Ratchet & Clank size matters on PSP. I get the title. It's just supposed to be a reference to being on a smaller screen. Cute. On PS2, the reference doesn't land. If it's not on a handheld, what does this mean? I have no earthly clue, which is why I prefer the version released in other regions. Ratchet & Clank, your c**k is small. This was developed by the same team who did The Lost Frontier, so yes, this was one of their talents. Do you think they can sing? Size Matters is perfectly fine, but the PSP version is generally considered better as it's a more fully complete and stable release. Size Matters on PS2 can be glitchy with a worse camera that's oftentimes too close to your character. It came to the console just over a year after the PSP release, but they didn't add anything in that time. If anything, they cut content. No more multiplayer as per usual, but in addition, strangely, one cutscene is missing in the PS2 port. It took them a year to change their mind. It all comes down to Secret Agent Clank. It always does. These 3 games, just don't work on a console in the context they're presented in. Of course, does that mean I never want them on a console? No. Maybe an eventual remaster on an HD system, that would be great. But these released on PS2 fairly close or day and date with their respective PSP versions, and you can tell they were only ever meant to be smaller scale PSP games, but puked onto the PlayStation 2 to give that system a few more new releases. Come on, Secret Agent Clank on PS2, Birds running for Senate, it's the same thing. How the hell did you get here? A lot of these games don't make sense on PlayStation 2. Now, it doesn't mean they can't be on a console ever. No. I mean in the context of a brand new PlayStation 2 game at the time you buy at the store and are expecting a PlayStation 2 game from. There's often nothing denoting these are anything but a standard PlayStation 2 game. And while all these games work fine on the console, them being here kind of highlights how many handheld games are truly designed around that smaller experience. I'm telling you, man, these games were just meant to be played in an environment where you're not expecting as much from them, because once you put them on a console, it's in the rival gangs territory. A few other PSP games made their way over to PS2, like Wipeout Pulse in Europe and the Siphon Filter games, showing that this was a lucrative plan for Sony. I mean, take some game that's already done and put it on a console that can run it easily, and you have yourself a recipe for non-success, I'd say existence, which is why they kept up with this plan with the PlayStation Vita, kinda sorta. You'd think Vita games like Uncharted Golden Abyss and Killzone Mercenary would have been quick and dirty PlayStation 3 games to spit out in 2014 after the PS4 launched to give their previous console one last year of big-name Sony games, but I think the state of gaming at the time would have made such a strategy pretty flawed. The PS3 was positioned as this blockbuster powerhouse. When an Uncharted game was playing on it, you knew. So taking these Vita games and doing a quick and dirty blow-up, I don't think it would have worked as well. The PS3 had a reputation with graphics. The PS2 didn't. Yeah, put whatever on this thing. Sony will, why can't I? Well, yeah, some PSP games were remastered for PS3. Those were labeled as such. It wasn't like how it was back on the PS2, like, oh, well, this is supposed to be played indoors. However, a few PlayStation Vita games made their way over to PlayStation 3. First up, Hot Shots Golf World Invitational. Originally a Vita launch title in early 2012, the PS3 release occurred digitally only in the summer of 2013. A larger scale game like this being digital only definitely undermines its importance in my opinion. I mean, this is the 6th mainline game in the Hot Shots Golf series. It wasn't just like a handheld spin-off, no, it was literally numbered 6 in Japan. And the PS3 version is no slouch at all. Basically everything from the Vita original is here, accounted for, and then some. I'm sure you lack the touchscreen support now, and that portion of the game is obviously worse, but this is the same game now with much better visuals, free DLC, extra content, and modes. The user interface still feels tailor-made for a portable, but this is the same game, yet better. I honestly wish they did more Vita ports like this on PS3. Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation was a companion title to not Assassin's Creed 2. It was only on the Vita, and by damn it, you can tell. I think they promised Sony an exclusive Assassin's Creed before thinking this deal through. What is that? This game just didn't have the budget to be what it should have been. It's not that the Vita couldn't handle a full-fledged Assassin's Creed game, it's that Ubisoft couldn't handle a full-fledged Assassin's Creed game for the Vita. It's a shame considering this game's story and characters have some massive potential. The main character may be one of the most interesting in the entire series, but it's all in just a whatever side game. Well, a little over a year after the initial release, Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation HD launched digitally on PS3, 360, and PC. That'll solve everything. When you blow a game like this up, it really does highlight the problems it had originally. While it's far more accessible this way, it's now so much easier to see where concessions were made with the core game design to get this title out in time and within budget for a failing handheld. Like, come on. While this is the definitive way to play the game, it will never not feel like an awkward experience. On a home console, you're just going to be comparing it to the superior Assassin's Creed titles. On the Vita, you're playing it on the Vita. At least with a game like Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate, that's less of a wannabe home console game to go and more of its own thing. This launched right alongside Arkham Origins on 3DS and Vita and is a 2.5D side-scroller. The camera angles try to trick you into thinking it's anything but. However, I'm no fool. I bought this game thrice. Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate Deluxe Edition came to Wii U, 360, PS3, and PC just a little over 5 months later. Digitally only, including numerous extra features, new difficulty options, costumes, costumes, maps, the works. This game, I don't have a problem with on consoles. It's so different from the core Arkham games that it feels more like a unique spin-off rather than something trying to pass off as a traditional entry like Liberation or The Lost Frontier. Of course, the only reason why they did a 2D Batman Arkham game is to put it on a handheld, but that doesn't take away from this being a unique experience anywhere you play it. And visually, it's a nice bump up from the Vita. From the 3DS,
I wouldn't call it a step up. I would call it a fucking step up.
3DS games coming to home consoles is a godsend. Hey, I love this stupid piece of shit. But it is a stupid piece of shit. Have you seen this screen? Because I can't. Some games, as good as they were on here, you just wish they were somewhere else, and thankfully a handful of titles did such a deed, starting off with Resident Evil Revelations. A technical showpiece for the 3DS, no doubt. I mean, this looks like an Xbox 360 game that was censored. As cool as it is, Revelations was a 3DS exclusive initially, and it ran and looked and sounded as good as it did. This is a game that just feels right with a controller on a big screen TV. This was originally seen as a bit of a return to form for the series, as recent entries were more action focused, with this one more horror focused. And because of that, man, this type of experience just works better at home, as on a handheld, if something scares you, it's more accessible to be a bitch. Listen, I love Revelations as a 3DS game. It was made for the platform and is undeniably impressive. However, it's obvious where this would work better. Unlike the PSP Grand Theft Autos and Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, Revelations is more of its own type of game rather than trying to be a portable companion title. So because of that, I think it feels quite at home on a big TV. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be something that it's not, but that doesn't take away from the original release. Now, I'm a simple man. I don't play Castlevania Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate, and I live my life by that motto. And now I'm ruining my life's work. You know what surprised me how quick this went from 3DS to 360 and PS3, but in reality, it was kind of the other way around, as the title was initially developed for those systems, then ported down to 3DS, then ported up to 360 and PS3. Seems a bit backwards, but hey, it exempts it from being a game going from handheld to console technically. The law can be a fucked up thing. Now, Nintendo isn't immune to bringing their own handheld titles to home consoles, though not nearly as often as you'd think. Sushi Striker: The Way of Sushido released on Nintendo 3DS and Nintendo Switch on the same day. However, it was originally revealed as a 3DS exclusive. Out of all 3DS games to bring to Switch, I see how it is. This was always a strange game to make the jump, not because it's bad, but because of the type of game it was. A 2D puzzle game played across 2 screens using touch. Yeah, it's perfect for my home theater setup. A good bit of the gameplay had to be adjusted to work on a singular display, but they made it happen. It's obvious this was brought over due to the simplicity of it all. All this 2D art was more than likely created in HD to begin with, so it wouldn't have required as much work as, say, bringing Kirby Battle Royale over to the platform. While I'm happy this game got twice as much of a chance to succeed due to being on more systems, I don't think the split timelines are much different. Honestly, if this game should have gone anywhere, I think it would have fit perfectly on mobile phones. I mean, just picturing the Switch footage on a smartphone, it just looks right. I don't know. It's hard to make games that were designed for handhelds look at home elsewhere sometimes, but damn it, Nintendo tried. Miitopia made the leap from 3DS to Switch with a beautiful facelift. Sure, some models and environments look a bit more simple and or blocky, but for the most part, this looks like a modern Nintendo game. That doesn't take away from the fact that why bring this over? This isn't even a Sushi Striker situation where like, oh, it's easy to bring over. This had to get a whole graphical facelift, extra content, in addition to consolidating everything to one screen. I guess out of all 3DS games they could bring to Switch, Miitopia filled the biggest void. I mean, why bring Zelda: Link Between Worlds over when you already have Link's Awakening? Why Metroid: Samus Returns when you already have Dread? Why Yoshi's New Island when you already have Depression? Nintendo is pretty conservative with bringing old handheld titles to a home system, and I think that shows how they have a vastly different philosophy behind this kind of stuff. More often, they put console games on handhelds, even though putting handheld games on consoles seems to me like it would be easier, but they seem to only really do it when they have a reason to, whether it's to present a game in a new light or with a new gimmick. Kirby's Dream Land on the Game Boy received a truncated remake within Kirby Superstar, and WarioWare Mega Micro Games from the Game Boy Advance was brought over to the GameCube via Mega Party Games. This is basically a stripped-down version of that GBA game with multiplayer modes. Yes, a stripped-down Game Boy Advance game, released for the GameCube. When Mom said I could be anything when I was older, I surely didn't think she'd meant I'd be an owner of this. Mega Party Games is so weird! Like, it's basically just an excuse to give you multiplayer modes to play all the WarioWare microgames in. The single player is just basically a playlist of all the microgames. No story cutscenes or extra unlockables like in the GBA version. The microgames don't even hide the fact they're from the Game Boy Advance. It definitely helps that the multiplayer modes are as fun as they are, but this is such a limited game. I feel like they removed more features than they added. I understand this is for multiplayer, but for a straight conversion of the original with no graphical enhancements whatsoever, loads of content ripped out and a handful of multiplayer modes added in, I can't help but feel that it's not enough for how little was done and how much was removed from the core game. Well, WarioWare struck again on the Wii with the downloadable only WarioWare DIY Showcase, which was a companion title to WarioWare DIY on the Nintendo DS. While the DS game focused on game creation, Showcase is just that, a showcase for those created games. You could transfer them from the DS wirelessly to play on the big screen, though you could still play Showcase as its own smaller WarioWare game, complete with cutscenes and exclusive microgames made with DIY on the DS. These are not the same games though, they're complementary to each other, unlike the downloadable Phoenix Wright games on Wii. Whatever the definition of trying is, I know what it isn't. Some developers thought to bring their Nintendo DS franchises over to the Wii. I mean, it made some sense. Touchscreen, using the Wii Remote's pointer, yeah, that works. Let's see Drawn to Life on a console.
You know, there's not as many handheld games that make the jump to consoles as you may expect, and going through all these releases, it kind of makes sense. Listen, if all handheld games could be on console and all console games could be on handheld, that would be the dream, but I don't think handheld games always feel right in the home. Many were designed in very different ways compared to the console counterparts. They can be much more compact with unique structures like episodic and mission-based formulas. Not that those are bad or don't belong on consoles, it's just different and shows how separate handheld and console gaming can be. But these brave companies went against the norm and sacrificed design integrity for lazy money. Godspeed. I would never do that for lazy money. I just lazily commit mail fraud. However, one company is, in my opinion, the king of bringing handheld to console. Well, more so Jester.
During the reign of the Sega Genesis, Sega introduced the Game Gear as their handheld competition towards Nintendo's Game Boy, utilizing incredibly similar technology to the Genesis's predecessor, the Sega Master System, which also was still being supported at the time. The Master System experienced continued success throughout the 90s in Europe and especially Brazil, so while in North America it was all but forgotten, the console kept on receiving releases, with many coming from the Game Gear and many Game Gear titles coming from it. Yes, Sonic 1, 2, and Chaos for the Game Gear came from the Master System, though Sonic Blast and Spinball went from Game Gear to Master System. Same with Streets of Rage 1 and 2, Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, and loads of licensed games. This was Sega's strategy with these consoles. They were basically one and the same for a bit there, and it made sense. It was a very smart way to go about supporting both platforms. But it severely takes away from both systems' libraries. The Sega Master System version was almost always superior just due to being a bit more powerful and not having to zoom the screen in as much as the Game Gear versions did. And god damn it, it is great to finally play Sonic 1 on a TV.
Wow. If this whole experience has taught me anything, it's that handheld games, they got more going on than you may think. Oftentimes rooted in their design is something fundamentally different than what you'd find on a home console, which makes many of these conversions a bit awkward. But that just makes me respect these handheld entries even more. They're more complex than they seem. Just because something's smaller doesn't mean they don't have a lot going on. Like, imagine if I was smaller, like an ant. Can you imagine if I was an ant? I wish I couldn't.
Hey y'all, Scott here. I have molecules. I can admit that. Those molecules form a man with skin who uses it to play Bug. Evil isn't born, but that was. My brain was only ever designed to be this, which means if I want to tolerate using a PC for 30 minutes to discuss PC games on consoles, I must go forth with brain surgery, replacing it with an exact copy, though now, with the PC game tolerance toggle switched to iffy. The results?
Maybe.
What's scarier than a serial killer? A serial killer in your house! This is a video game console, a piece of hardware designed first and foremost as a game-playing device. You may be able to do other things on it, but at the end of the day, these products are meant to be plugged into your TV, connected to a controller, and playing games specifically designed for it. Not much can go wrong here. When using a video game console, the only thing you truly use is your ass. This is the simpleton's method of playing video games. No necessary knowledge on fixing anything, no fear as to if your game won't run. The only thing you have to worry about is if Applebee's will be open after this. And because of that, I feel that many console users, myself included, forget an entire world exists beyond this. Ever hear of personal computers?
Yeah.
Video games on PCs. Yeah, I don't believe in God either. Some people prefer playing video games this way. Some people also punch cats. Now, I have a PC here. Wait, let me get the dust off of it. Yeah, I am primarily a Mac user, which, hey, I can play games on here. Uno. There's actually more games than you may expect that release for Mac, but that doesn't really take away how I like my computer to be for productivity and my console for pleasure. But hey, there's reasons some people prefer gaming on PC.
Much like how many say there's some reason people f bugs.
A game console's controller only has so many inputs, with thumbsticks offering limited range on where you can go with them, compared to a PC's natural input, the keyboard and mouse. Yo, they got caps lock on this thing?
Damn it.
Well, you have like over 100 keys and a mouse that can go damn near anywhere? I mean, move a cursor on screen with your controller. Now with a mouse. Yeah, it's fair to say this control setup has some advantages, at least with certain games. Not sure how much it helps with Wii Fit.
So I guess we just have to live with the fact that some games, they're meant to be on PC with a keyboard and mouse. And if we want to play them, well, we're just gonna have to log off WikiHow. And I'm too busy using my keyboard and mouse, not paying off my loans to play video games with them. I would love to get into PC gaming, believe me. Was that believable? But I've accepted the fact that PCs and I get along about as well as not me and not PCs. It wouldn't work out. I would love to play The Sims 2 Pets, but I just don't have time to use a keyboard and mouse. Did I say keyboard and mouse? I meant states of matter.
PC games on consoles. Dogs in funny suits.
Get him out of there!
While PC and console gaming can be quite separated at times, numerous titles share the mediums, even if it takes a while. Many console games eventually get a PC release, which is oftentimes met with roaring applause. Like you finally unshackled the prisoner, it's about damn time! So of course, you'd expect the same reception when a PC game spreads its wings to consoles.
The president's been shot.
Let's start with a classic, SimCity, created by the company Maxis, first released on PCs as early as 1989. Create your own city and you too will understand the life of government officials.
We need more housing. Or a third zoo.
SimCity is a game that'll never get old, no matter how many times you boot it up. You'll always find something new to try, with the game actively encouraging you to screw around and watch everything burn sometimes, featuring a toggle to turn on a monster attack, for example. While the PC was always SimCity's home, the series received numerous console editions, with not only the most notable, but the first one releasing it for the Super Nintendo as a launch title in 1991. Published and even developed by Nintendo. Yeah, they nabbed the SimCity license and made the SNES version themselves. They even changed the monster attack to a Bowser one from Super Mario Bros. But this is still classic SimCity, and honestly, it may be better than the original on PC. Nintendo added a ton of charm to the game, with background music everywhere, fun visuals with the character of Dr. Ike coming in to tell you shit's f***ed. They even added a lot in the form of new buildings. This felt like Nintendo had a ton of love and admiration towards the original PC game and just really wanted to make a version themselves. But keep in mind, this is on the Super Nintendo and uses a controller. So instead of just moving the mouse wherever you please, you now have to control a cursor with the D-pad, which isn't nearly as precise. Oftentimes I find myself overshooting or undershooting where I want to go, and the user interface doesn't feel adapted to the console enough. It still looks and feels like the PC release, and because of that, it can be tricky to click on specific things or know what some buttons do. And they released a damn mouse for the system a year later. If SimCity didn't use it, thank Christ Vegas Stakes did. It isn't too bad without a mouse though. I think it works fine enough with a controller and doesn't get too frustrating, mainly due to how simple the original SimCity is. However, it does immediately show the problem with bringing some PC games to console. But hey, for an older conversion, this holds up insanely well and was done with a ton of care, which bodes well for the other PC to console games. After SimCity, the sky's the limit.
The ants are winning.
Sim Ant, one of the many follow-ups to SimCity. I mean, they covered all bases. Sim Earth, Sim Life, Sim Farm. It was only a matter of time. Death, taxes, ants. In contrast to SimCity on SNES, Ant, plus the other Sim titles, weren't developed or published by Nintendo. This one specifically was actually published by Maxis themselves. I feel that the success behind City on the platform opened the floodgates for all these titles to go all over the place, which is both great and terrifying. Hey, more people get to play Sim Ant! Oh god. Sim Ant on SNES is alright. Compared to the original PC version, this one feels a lot more zoomed in and confusing to navigate. It works though, decent version of the game on console. No, you can actually use the Super Nintendo mouse in this one, which is a more than welcome feature. Lacking support for the Super Scope though, not realistic. The problem though, as these games kept getting pumped out on PC, they were getting more and more complex, which worked great on computers, but made console conversion so much more complicated. SimCity continued to get console games throughout the years, but here I have SimCity DS, released in 2007. While this isn't a direct conversion of a specific title, it just doesn't feel like they put the time in to rethink how SimCity could work on the handheld. Instead, it kind of adapted how it's designed on PCs to the interface of the Nintendo DS.
What?
It works, it just doesn't feel as optimized for the DS as it could have been. Everything's too small and awkward to select with the stylus pen. How everything's shown at an angle, while true to the PC game, it makes it clunkier and less intuitive to place objects with a stylus since your damn hand's in the way. This seems like it would have been a match made in heaven. The touchscreen can replicate a lot of the precision you get with the mouse. The problem is, they didn't make SimCity for the DS. They kind of just threw SimCity on the DS. Consoles just don't seem to be the right fit for many of these types of games, which is why sometimes they'll put out original games based on PC series just for these things. From the Sim series, only for Wii and Nintendo DS, we got Sim Animals. Now, why was this not on PC? PETA. It works well with the Wii Remote's pointer, but that just makes me ask why this didn't also release on PC. Hey, sometimes you gotta throw the console users a bone. In this case, it's Beaver Allen.
You, Windows.
But hey, the Sim series has been throwing console users a bone each and every entry. As part of the same Sim franchise as the previously discussed games, The Sims is one of the most successful video game series of all time because people love to use a keyboard and mouse to do weird shit. It's all about creating your sim and living life, customizing your place, getting a job, starting relationships, or none of that. Piss on the floor. Starting with the original Sims, that may have launched on PC, but eventually made its way to consoles 3 years later, the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox. Yep, here it is, the worst thing. The Sims on console oftentimes isn't bad, but it just isn't fun to control, man. Going from a keyboard and mouse to two thighs and a torso feels like I'm controlling Sims with a keyboard ball. Every action is crammed into the controller, but it's still not enough, and you have to go through all kinds of menus and different screens for action that would just require you to move the mouse and click on PC. Whenever I'd see The Sims on consoles, I'd get excited, but after 30 minutes of trying to make do, I would give up and just try to get into nicotine again. It's not unplayable by any means, it's just too clunky for me to really have fun playing with a controller. Well, The Sims on console was followed up by The Sims Bustin' Out, a game that was never on PC. This was a console-only joint on PS2, GameCube, Xbox, Game Boy Advance, and N-Gage.
The GameCube.
So The Sims on PC had loads of expansion packs, and by these you get more content in your game, like dogs and sex and cats. The Sims Bustin' Out is pretty much a new version of Sims 1, with various features from those expansion packs included, with the biggest feature being the ability to leave your house, which is where the title came from. Okay, moving on. It's more of the same from the last one control-wise, but on the Game Boy Advance, we have an entirely different experience that, honestly, feels a bit better to me. It's not trying to be a consoleized version of a PC game, because it's on the GBA. They just had to flat out make a different thing entirely. This is more of an adventure game with RPG life simulation elements. You can't achieve the level of detail on consoles and PCs, so why even bother? Just make something that works leagues better on the Game Boy Advance while retaining the character of The Sims. Beautiful. The console version? I mean, if you're gonna play Sims 1 on console, you might as well go the bustin' out route. There's just more in this one. It's just, every second I play this, I just wish I had a damn mouse.
And careful what you wish for, because I got a rat instead.
The Herbs Sims in the City was a total console-only spit-off to The Sims. This one focusing on grungy city and apartment living, on box and ferrets. Why this wasn't on PC, I have no damn clue, but it does feel a bit more tailor-made for console. While it maintains the tropes of a life simulator, Herbs is a bit more focused on getting to an end point. It's not as open-ended as a normal Sims game. You want to build up your rep across all the districts, and that lust is what drives you through the experience, whereas normal Sims games I'm gonna make you piss your pants. This game looks like it tried Monster twice. The Sims 2 on consoles features a new control scheme where we aren't telling our Sims where to go with a cursor. We just control our Sims outright. Scared the shit out of me when I first played. This goes against everything I expect from The Sims, but I will accept it for the sake of my happiness. It's so much more enjoyable to use a controller with a control scheme like this. Plus, they have a story mode, multiplayer. I mean, sure, features have been cut from the PC game. That's generally the case with console versions, but honestly, this is a decent version of Sims 2, regardless of how many changes they made from the original. Such as no expansion packs, you couldn't just buy the Sims 2 Pets expansion for your game, you just had to flat out buy the Sims 2 Pets. Yeah, this was an expansion pack on PC, but on console, it's a standalone release. Controls just like the console version of Sims 2, which is a blessing. And it's just taking the gameplay of The Sims 2 and making it more focused on owning pets. Gotta be honest, this one I was getting pretty into. I mean, it's bitch easy to earn money, you just rub the mutt's stomach a bit. That's a new sync right there. And I found the house building and editing controls to be surprisingly intuitive on the GameCube controller. The Sims 2 console lineup is actually pretty well done overall. They even did a console exclusive spin-off, The Sims 2 Castaway, focusing on surviving on a deserted island. It felt like they were improving the state of Sims on console more and more with each new entry. Genuinely, these games, even if they remove some features from the PC versions, work well on a controller. They feel optimized for them. But when The Sims 3 launched on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, it's The Sims 3! No, this wasn't supposed to happen! This is pretty much the base PC game on consoles with barely any features removed, which is good because, like I said, the previous versions would cut content, and this is basically the exact same game. But because of that, we lose the direct control we had in The Sims 2, and my god, do I miss it. Sure, pointing and clicking where to go is way more true to how The Sims was always meant to be played, but there's being true to yourself and not changing who you are to conform to society. And then there's just not taking a shower. For God's sakes, take a fucking bath! I liked how this was a bit different from the PC game. Sure, we're missing some features, but they made up for it with enhanced control and some new exclusive content. And I'd much rather take that than this, which is impressive, no doubt. It's a pretty faithful Sims 3 experience. But this is what I was talking about earlier. This just isn't fun for me to control. Might as well check out the Wii version then. I mean, the Wii Remote's pointer can easily replicate a mouse. So, of course, in this version, you have direct control of your Sim.
So, the version with a mouse replacement has you controlling your Sims like in The Sims 2 on consoles, and the version with a standard controller has you pointing and clicking. We're just doing things that make sense today!
I guess the pointer controls plus the direct control option would make the Wii release the best of the bunch, but it is on the Wii. So yeah, I get better control for worse performance. Maybe the DS version, well, god damn it. Now, The Sims 4 was basically a one-to-one conversion. You even get the same expansion packs from the PC on consoles for the first time ever. The Sims 3 still did the standalone Pets release thing, but because of the parity between versions, controls are still clunky point and click here. It's great that console users get the same exact game now, but what if I don't want that? Well, wrapping up the Sims discussion, we have to mention My Sims, a spin-off of the series made specifically for the Nintendo systems at the time, Wii and DS. It's kind of like how The Herbs was an attempt to consoleize The Sims, but this time, we have custody. My Sims did actually get a release on Windows, but it's very apparent how laser-focused this game was on capturing the Wii's audience. The Sims in this game look far more like Mii's than Sims. The gameplay feels much more akin to something like Animal Crossing, with you needing to rebuild your town by crafting and customizing furniture and housing and collecting things through the power of friendship. I don't know, isn't this from the series with the piss meter? Yes, a far more family-friendly, cutesy take on The Sims. Of course, when you whittle the franchise down to anything under a PG rating, you're pretty much left with a furniture builder. That's My Sims! Hey, the game did well enough to get numerous follow-ups. My Sims Kingdom was more of a linear adventure, going from island to island solving residents' problems. My Sims Party, My Sims Racing, My Sims Agents, My Sims Sky Heroes. That's a stretch! After all these games, I'm not really sure what the My Sims franchise was. Yeah, you can have them on weekends. Because if I'm gonna be spending my time doing anything, it's improving my credibility. Let's try Half-Life, the first game by legendary game developer Valve, released for Windows in 1998. See, I can do more than own Gubble. I can play one of the greatest video games of all time on PC, even nowadays. The world design, story, and interactivity are second to none. It's wild to play a shooter from this time that isn't a slog to get through or confusing in some way. Half-Life is amazing. If only I could play at 12 feet over there. Well, we're in luck. Just barely. Half-Life came to console in 2001 on the PlayStation 2. My sentence has finished. This was the only console version of Half-Life 1. Never came to the Xbox, GameCube, 360, PS3, PS4, Xbox One, none of that. It was meant to release on the Sega Dreamcast. Yeah, that's right, just like the Grinch. They eventually canceled this version as by the time it was ready to come out, the Dreamcast wasn't. That's not to say you can't play the game on Dreamcast. A nearly complete build leaked around 2013. You can burn that onto a disc and play on the console. But the PlayStation 2 version, that legally released. Everybody give it up for doing the right thing.
Let's play Half-Life on PlayStation 2 and Loiter.
Oh man, they're gonna cancel each other out!
You know, this game still holds up tremendously well, even on PS2. You obviously get a much nicer and smoother experience on PC, but the console version is no slouch with new multiplayer modes, loads of control options including mouse and keyboard support, plus just an overall fairly stable conversion from the computer. It's shocking to me that this was the only console release Half-Life 1 ever got, when this I'd consider to be a technical success. Now just imagine adding a 2 on the original Xbox to the title. Half-Life 2 on the original Xbox. Much like how 1 was a console exclusive on PS2, 2 is a console exclusive here, though it eventually made its way over to the next generation platforms. You ever play one of the greatest games of all time, and your first game experience was the Xbox port? Half-Life 2 was a landmark title, and it's still impressive to this day, and how interactive everything is, how smooth it all feels, the incredible design. It feels so natural to play, like your first playthrough is your 7th. You feel like a badass in this game. On the PC. On the Xbox, it's still Half-Life 2. Yeah, this feels like the PC version with resolution and frame rate clocked down a few pegs. Sure, that's a good thing, meaning they barely changed or removed anything. And yeah, good on the original Xbox for being able to play this game. That surely was not an easy task in 2005. It's just not the most compelling to look back at least with The Sims busting out on GBA like, damn, this game has Dusty Hog.
That is one seldom used pig.
Nah, this one is just Half-Life 2, running somewhat poorly. Me figuring that out is almost as impressive as me being colorblind. It's more than playable, but obviously there are much better methods of playing the game on console now, plus many of Valve's other games. The Purple Box, a collection not only containing Half-Life 2 and its follow-up Half-Life 2 Episode 1, but 3 games that made their debut as a part of this set: Half-Life 2 Episode 2, Team Fortress 2, and Portal. Seriously, this was how these games launched. Still one of the greatest deals in all of gaming. Getting 3 new Valve releases bundled together alongside Half-Life 2? The good version this time! But since these titles launched day and date on PC and Xbox 360, they aren't really PC games that came to console, though with Valve historically being a PC game developer, it's obvious these are PC games at their heart. That doesn't mean they don't work well on console. I mean, these are all first-person games that map everything perfectly to a controller. The keyboard and mouse is definitely a preference rather than a necessity for these games, which shows how control may not always be the reason for a game sticking to PC. Due to game consoles being a dedicated piece of hardware that's not upgradable like a PC and are meant to last a good few years, more often than not, if you're developing for the latest PlayStation system, you're developing for years old technology. PC games, you can craft your title around the latest and greatest specs out there. I'm sure the market that's able to buy your product may be more limited, but you're not gonna have nearly the amount of restrictions you'd have on consoles. That's why many things not initially made for this screen look like ass. Oh, that's why! The company Crytek was originally known for developing games so graphically intense that PCs were the only known apparatus that could run them. The original Far Cry and Crysis were PC exclusives hell-bent on making me happy. Some of the best looking games of their time. Now, they still look pretty damn good today. But obviously, when you can only sell your game to people with a powerful PC, reality sets in. You gotta swallow your pride and release your game on home consoles. Eventually, we got Far Cry Instincts on the original Xbox and Crysis on anything with buttons. Crysis on Xbox 360 and PS3 is basically just the PC game with 1 level missing, no online multiplayer, and downgraded graphics to the point where it's not the graphical powerhouse it once was. It still looks fine, but 95% of the reason most were interested in Crysis in 2007 was to ogle. When you take that away, I mean, it's still a great game, but the intense graphics were honestly a big part of what made Crysis Crysis. Far Cry Instincts, on the other hand, this is just a flat-out different game from the PC original. It's based on it, but to ensure it would run on the Xbox, They basically made a new game that got the gist of Far Cry 1. The story's a bit different, the level design has been altered to be more console friendly with less options for the player. It's pretty much just a dumbed down Far Cry, but this game got a sequel, Instinct's Evolution. Yeah, but it's only a sequel to this version, not the original Far Cry 1. Then the sequel got a remake on Wii titled Far Cry Vengeance. Then Far Cry Instinct's Predator was an Xbox 360 version of both Instincts and Evolution, and then Far Cry 2 released.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't explaining Far Cry, I was explaining quantum physics.
Far Cry's PC origins are similar to many a series, like The Witcher. Yeah, The Witcher 1 never released on anything but PC. It was meant to get an Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 edition titled The Witcher Rise of the White Wolf, but that ended up getting canned. It's a shame, because there's nothing about this game that feels like it needs to be a PC game. Eventually, The Witcher 2 released on PC only as well, later on receiving just an Xbox 360 version, and ever since then, the series has been multi-platform with The Witcher 3 launching on damn near everything. Actually anything. Which is definitely a trend for many of the most iconic PC franchises of all time. Just take a look at The Elder Scrolls and Fallout. Now this is a PC game.
I think.
Elder Scrolls made the jump with Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind being offered on the original Xbox in 2002, though Fallout didn't get a mainline console release until Fallout 3 in 2008. Prior to that, the only taste we ever got was Fallout Brotherhood of Steel on Xbox and PlayStation 2. Not Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel on PC, released just 2 years before. No. This is just Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, and it's just as much of a Fallout game as Beat Saber. So the original Fallout games were top-down RPGs. They may be incredibly difficult for a newcomer to approach these days, but there's still a lot to appreciate here. Fallout Brotherhood of Steel is also top-down. This is such a mindless and misguided title. This isn't Fallout. This is a beat-em-up with some RPG elements with a world and dialogue options kinda like Fallout. I mean, I can't blame him for not putting the traditional Fallouts on console. Look at this. But this is an example of trying too hard to make a game for a console audience. Those console players don't want to think unlike the PC guys. Let's finally bring Fallout to consoles and just make it Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. What, was this created out of a threat? Pretty embarrassing when the SNES versions of PC games are more faithful. The Super Nintendo was apparently the primo spot for people who didn't have PCs to play PC games. What did they do their taxes on?
They didn't.
I mean, it was amongst the most powerful systems of its generation and the most popular to boot, so those only made all the sense in the world. Maybe if they named it something else, even more PC games would come to it. As it stands, we got the grandfathers of the modern first-person shooter, Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. Well, PowerPoints of them. And the fact these work as well as they do is a bit of a miracle and set the standard for future ports.
Oh, there's the standard.
These games are completely playable, yet far from ideal, with horrible frame rates and sluggish control. Wolfenstein 3D got butchered by the censors.
Really cleaned it up. It's like, damn, this is like a Pixar movie now.
Both of these games have gotten numerous re-releases since, more so with Doom. It's been made available for most things now. Why, is this the game that got spread everywhere? I mean, obviously, it's Doom. It's one of the most iconic and beloved PC games of all time, and being a first-person shooter using primitive 3D and numerous 2D elements does make it one of the easiest of the whole genre to make available elsewhere. But that just makes me question the amount of differences between these versions. Most of the console ports of Doom are missing levels. They may be shortened or out of order or missing music or have completely new features. It's always up in the air with Doom ports. They're all different, but that's kind of the beauty of it all. Would you really want all the versions of Doom to be picture perfect, the exact same as the PC version? Because even if they were, you just move on to the version of Doom on the next console you'd own and leave these ones to irrelevancy. The differences between these ports, no matter how negative they are, keep these games alive in the form of talking points. Sure, you have no reason to play Doom on the Sega Saturn anymore, but at least if you did, you'd have something to say about it.
Well, that stunk.
But if you can pull Wolfenstein and Doom on a Super Nintendo of all things, damn it, why not Civilization?
Why not do hard drugs?
Civ has always been one of my favorite Mac game series. Every mainline game's released on Mac. I said nothing wrong, hee-haw. A strategy game about running a civilization from the very start. Discovering new land or other civilizations, deciding whether or not to declare war on them or team up, figuring out how to utilize your resources, what to research. It seems very overwhelming and complex at first, but once you start playing, it all makes perfect sense and is incredibly natural and addictive to play. You can easily lose hours to just one playset session, and much like SimCity, you can either chip away at the same save file for months or always start up a new game, and it'll be an entirely different experience. And it shocked me how many games appeared on consoles, starting with the original SNES. Honestly, this one has loads of SimCity energy. They added tons of character to this version, music, graphical touch-up. The original Civilization is, for lack of better words, fucking creepy. This ain't too bad. In fact, you could say this is preferable to the original PC version in many ways. But moving forward in time to Civilization 6 on Nintendo Switch, I don't know, man. This just isn't fun for me. Maybe playing during the fire had something to do with it, but I doubt it. Civ just has so much more going on with the user interface now. Not that it's super complicated, rather, it just feels far more clunky mapping all these commands to a controller. And not that it's bad, this is just my opinion. I've seen numerous people adapt to the controls and find them to be incredibly intuitive. It's just not for me personally. Well, maybe Civilization Revolution is for me then.
Just like Air!
This was a console-only spin-off of the series on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and plays very similarly, but is more dumbed down and simplified for a smoother experience with a controller on a TV. It works pretty well here, though obviously the series is still best experienced on PC in my opinion. The Revolution did get a DS and mobile release, and with a touchscreen, it seems like a match made in heaven, which really makes you think, what about a Wii version? That pointer would do wonders for the experience, and while it was in the works, it ended up getting canceled due to the amount of resources it would have taken to craft a lower-end version of a game made for HD consoles. That's a shame because this control setup would have been amazing. It really makes you think why more PC games didn't come to the system.
Out of fear.
Here we have Back to the Future the game on Wii, an older episodic Telltale point-and-click adventure game brought over to Wii and PlayStation 3, which was oddly a trend for that company. Some of their other PC releases would eventually go there, but not Xbox 360, or Wii and Xbox 360, but not PlayStation 3, or just PlayStation 3, or just Xbox 360. Back to the Future eventually got an anniversary edition, which finally put it out on 360 alongside PS4 and Xbox One, so, you know, I can finally sleep. But I assume this would be best on Wii due to the pointer controls. What I got was a game that freaks out when a new color is introduced on screen. It always does that when purple happens. This game works, but it freezes for a few seconds when you fundamentally do anything. And it's not like it's a fast-paced game where this really matters. Like, no, you're just clicking on things in the environment and selecting dialogue options. But it just makes the whole experience feel sluggish. Like, why can't this be smooth? Like Spy Fox.
If the Wii can run this, there's no excuse.
I mean, this is a classic edutainment point and click from the 90s. This alongside the others like Freddy Fish, Pajama Sam, Putt Putt. They may not be everybody's first pick for a PC game to bring to console, but their simplicity makes them so easy to put on systems like the Wii or Nintendo Switch that you might as well. These are great for kids and created such fun memories for players back in the day, much like the Oregon Trail. One of the greatest PC games of all time has barely been ported to home consoles outside of a few very specific instances, including a release on the Wii in 2011. Oh man, I can't wait to learn about the struggling pioneer life by strategizing what to buy, when to hunt, and where to go.
This isn't the struggling pioneer life. This just stinks.
Yeah, this really feels like they over-engineered the Oregon Trail, trying to make it impressive and modern, more of an actual game. But it's like the original version is more intuitive and fun than this. That game was so quick and easy to jump into and play. This one is just a slog. And it's like, this should have been perfect. Some game systems just have the perfect interface for these types of games. But nope, put StarCraft on the Nintendo 64.
Jesus, have you ever heard of foreplay?
Like, sure, it works. StarCraft made the transition as good as it could here, but why? It's just confusing. This is the only console port the StarCraft series ever received. It's pretty good for what it is, but like, what the hell? Warcraft is in the same boat. The second game is the only one that ever came to consoles, just the Sega Saturn and PlayStation. I just find it confusing. They try once and then give up. Why try once instead of not at all, or at least try one more time? Because while these Blizzard developed series barely ever came to consoles, Diablo has consistently, with all the main entries receiving ports. I guess it makes sense as Diablo, being an action RPG hack and slash, translates pretty smoothly over to a controller. But Blizzard has always been a PC-oriented company, so much so that their biggest game of all time, World of Warcraft, was always just a PC game. most of these games were simply just designed with that keyboard and mouse setup. Bringing them over to consoles, yeah, it'll work, but it's just not the same. Even nowadays, they seem to be putting less effort into revamping user interfaces for consoles and just putting the game as you know it on there, like Microsoft Flight Simulator. However, with the amount of games I've talked about making an oddball jump to consoles, many of the most iconic series of all time began as PC-only titles. Tetris, Minecraft, Call of Duty, Battlefield, Grand Theft Auto, all games that launched as PC exclusives. Hell, a series like Grand Theft Auto abandoned its lineage with console versions launching first in most instances these days. It shows how releasing on PC is oftentimes easier for some games to start off on, even if they end up working better on consoles in the end. So while many titles can stumble in the transition, that transition is necessary for a franchise's evolution. Even if it controls or looks worse, trying new things is how growth occurs.
Maybe I should do the same. I've had fun playing these PC games, and their console counterparts, oftentimes, well, worse, are perfectly playable enough. There's so much more to gaming than just the latest Nintendo thing. And I feel like I've severely limited my options and my growth as a human being by just assuming I wouldn't like these games. And there's so many more PC games on console that I haven't taken a look at or even mentioned. Maybe someday, but for now, I think I really just need to look at that PC over there and give the biggest nod of my life saying, yes! I will relapse! Hey all, Scott here. I am not doing well. It's been a week since Daylight Savings Day. Worst holiday. I've changed my clocks. I'm still not used to it. I hate change. I've had the same feet for years, thank you. I don't want to change, and I'm gonna stick to doing what I do best. Playing games that released in 2018 on the PS3.
The next generation of gaming is upon us. It's time to upgrade.
No! No!
Yeah, upgrading can be scary. I just consider myself a big fetus with hair. See, some people are perfectly content with what they already have. They don't need to constantly buy new toys to feel excitement. They can just keep playing with their mud and grass while I buy my 4th new iPhone this month. They may be fiscally responsible, but who's having the real fun here? But when a new video game console launches, there's always those few games that make anybody go, I want it. I want the brand new console with the new controller in this game and a compliment. Maybe not the compliment. Buying new game consoles the second they come out is always expensive. You don't really get the early adopter discount most of the time. You pay more to experience something first, but we live in an age where the second after a fancy new product is released, it's immediately outdated. If you wait around for it to get cheaper, the next new thing will come out to replace it. Then you'll wait for that to get cheaper and it happens all over again. We're in an endless loop of spending too much money. So, yeah, I don't care about that fancy new console. I'll stick to my old one. It doesn't matter anyways because all those new games coming out, yeah, they may be releasing for the new generation, but they're also releasing on the last one. Poverty wins again. These are cross-generation games that release not only for the current generation consoles, but the last generation consoles as well. Xbox One games also releasing on Xbox 360, PlayStation 4 games also releasing on PlayStation 3. And 2. But see, these downgraded versions can either be undeniably impressive or flat out terrifying. Sometimes they take a lot away from the big boy current gen versions since they have to create those games with the previous generation in mind. They can't go hog wild with the PS4 game because, remember, they're making a PS3 game too. Though sometimes the last gen version is made first and then a current gen version is created based off of that build. I think this is the most resourceful way to go about it. But of course, most of the time they just take the current generation version and cheese grate the out of it to fit on older consoles. Come on, video game industry, listen to me, white kid chair sits. So what defines a cross-generation game? Well, to me, I'm considering to be games that release on 2 or more generations of game consoles around the same time. It could be on the same day or within the first few months. This has been a standard for a while now. Back in the NES days, some games released between that and the SNES and Sega Genesis. But the NES version of a game was almost always completely different from the SNES version. Spot the difference. However, Nintendo themselves did a few cross-gen games, releasing on both systems. All puzzle games. Tetris 2, Yoshi's Cookie, Wario's Woods, these made their way to multiple consoles because NES users were worried they would have to buy a Super Nintendo just for Wario's Woods. Puzzle games aren't too graphically intensive and pretty simple overall, so putting them on the NES just made sense. Might as well support the system a couple seconds longer. It was usually the simplest games that made their way over to past consoles back then, like Frogger. The PS1 game came out, and right alongside it were versions for the Genesis and SNES. These were 100% not the same games. But see, the cross-generation games I like are the ones where the platform list is a nutritional facts label. It just keeps going and I just accept it. Games that appear on this many platforms are usually of the licensed kids game variety. One of the most notorious examples, Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. God, fucking game.
8 platforms. Now, to be fair, some versions came out 2 years after the others, and 2 of these are handheld variants for the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. But just the fact this game swaps spit with nearly every console from one generation, and then the next one as well, is just straight up impressive. This has always been my standard. Normally for the first few years of a console, some games will come out for the previous generation as well, that's to be expected, but when the shift from the 6th generation to the 7th generation was happening, game companies didn't know when to pump the brakes. The Rat-Tat-Tooie video game. 11 different versions. Thank God, 2 people were scared they couldn't play. This game released on every major system from the 6th generation and every major system for the 7th generation, and really, they didn't have to. I think the original Xbox version was nearly canned, but GameStop nabbed it as a store exclusive. Well, now you gotta go. Licensed kids games in the mid to late 2000s were on as many platforms as it could possibly be on, and that's something we just don't see nearly as much nowadays. It's probably because back then the PlayStation 2 was still going strong. It was the most popular console of all time, and with the Nintendo Wii releasing to enormous success and having a similar power level, it just made sense to still produce versions of Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 games for this lower level of hardware. And at that point, you might as well puke out something for the GameCube. So many game consoles were a thing at the time, and nearly all of them had good reasons for developers to want to release on them. The Xbox 360, the most popular HD system at the time. The PlayStation 3, not as popular and harder to develop for, but there was still an install base, and it had comparable specs to the 360, so might as well put your game out on that. The Wii, now far less powerful than the 360 and PS3, but it had the biggest install base out of all of them. The PS2 was still selling and still had active users, and could run games made for the Wii pretty well, but why not make a last-gen version of the title? There's still an active audience for that. And hey, the PlayStation Portable is sort of a portable PlayStation 2. It shouldn't be too hard to squirt that version on there. And at that point, I mean, might as well do a GameCube and Xbox version. A lot of users on these older consoles were kids. They can't immediately upgrade to the new systems whenever they want, so if you're making a kids game, making versions for these consoles, it just made sense. PC and Mac versions too, why not? Oh, and Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS games. They'll be completely different, but it makes the list funnier. It's all about making your game as accessible as possible. No matter what console somebody has, they should have the audacity to play your game. And one of the oddest examples of this initiative were the Burger King games on Xbox and Xbox 360. There was a promotion for a while where you could get these exclusive games at Burger King. They play on both Xbox and Xbox 360. You'd think that means, oh, these were just made for the original Xbox, and then the Xbox 360 could play the original Xbox games. The 360 can in fact play a good chunk of original Xbox games. No, there is a separate original Xbox version of these games and an Xbox 360 version on the same disc. It changes based on what you use it on, just like Bengay. Cross-generation games were just different back then. There were so many different active consoles running all at the same time that it just made sense to put cars on everything. Except the PS3. PS3 owners, just admit it, you f***ed up, but there was a game that changed cross-generation games forever. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, released as a launch title for the Wii and 1 month later on the GameCube. See, Twilight Princess was initially revealed as just a GameCube game, but as time went on, its completion date lined up perfectly with the launch of Nintendo's next home console. Uh-oh! So why not prioritize a version for that console and have this big sweaty launch title alongside it? It was the same game across both consoles. I mean, the Wii was pretty much a GameCube on Adderall. It was more powerful, but is a rock really better than a big stone? Twilight Princess on Wii is in widescreen, which is nice, though so much of the screen real estate is blocked by a giant Wii Remote diagram, so it's sort of a half upgrade. You have forced motion controls in this version. Of course, it was the Wii and a launch title at that. They wanted to show off how the Wii Remote could be a sword. They could have let you plug in a GameCube controller to control it just like the GameCube version, but of course, they wanted Wii users to be Wii users. Now, you'd think with the GameCube and Wii being so similar power-wise that these would be pretty identical versions outside of controls and the aspect ratio. Well, consider that most of the population is right-handed. Link has prominently been left-handed in Zelda games up to this point. Swinging the Wii Remote with your right hand when Link attacks with his left would feel funny. So they decided to make Link right-handed in the Wii version. That was obviously done by just changing Link's model, right? Ah. It says no. The Wii version of Twilight Princess is mirrored. The entire game is flipped compared to the GameCube version. I mean, when the Wii version of this game was announced, did anybody say, yeah, I hope it's flipped? In all honesty, it's kind of cool they did that. It gives each version distinction while not necessarily taking away from either one. Cross-gen releases were always frequent, but Twilight Princess was one of the first big AAA titles to do so. A game you'd legitimately buy a new console for, releasing on an old one around the same time. This became a huge trend starting with the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. So many games released on those consoles in addition to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The difference was, there was quite a big leap in terms of power. Can PS4 games run on the PS3?
Sure. Destiny, Far Cry 4, Dragon Age Inquisition, Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, Assassin's Creed 4, Thief, Call of Duty Ghosts, Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zero, Battlefield 4, Need for Speed Rivals, Murdered Soul Suspect, Alien Isolation, The Evil Within, Dragon Ball Xenoverse, Resident Evil Revelations 2, Battlefield Hardline, Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, all released on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. To be honest, many of these games worked on these platforms. Here I have Wolfenstein: The New Order for Xbox 360, coming on a whopping 4 discs. One of them we pop in just to install the game onto the hard drive. That's how you can tell if the game really wasn't made for the 360, when you have to install it. This is normal, this is normal, this is normal. Playing the game, I mean, it works, everything's all here, though when it switches from the super high quality cutscenes to the actual gameplay, it's so much more noticeable than on PS4. It doesn't look too bad, but it obviously doesn't look the greatest either. But if you only had an Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 and wanted to play this game, it's not a bad option. I did get stuck on nothing here though, and then my bullets were suspended in the air. I could shoot them though, so false alarm. Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain was such an odd game to be cross-gen. It released in late 2015, and being such a huge graphical showcase, you'd think they'd want to keep it on PS4 and Xbox One, but nope, 360 and PS3 versions with a mandatory install, thank you very much. This was probably released on last-gen platforms due to the first part of the MGS5 experience releasing on them as well, Ground Zeroes. At least that released in early 2014, only a few months into the new console's lives, so it felt more warranted. Jesus, you can tell this was not made for these consoles, just how pixelated everything can be. It still looks alright, though you can tell this game is not the most comfortable in this environment. And there's Watch Dogs. Oh, Watch Dogs. A game initially revealed as the showcase title for the next generation, a game that couldn't be done on the current platforms, an experience you'd have to buy a PlayStation 4 or Xbox One for. But it also runs on soap. 2 discs and 1 installation later, bam, it's Watch Dogs as God intended. Mediocre. Most of these 360 versions run fine enough. I mean, they're not as good as the next gen alternatives, but if you really wanted to play these games and this was your only option, definitely serviceable. It's just odd seeing some games go the cross-gen route, like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. Could a game like this run on the 360? No problem. Look at these clouds. Titanfall was a game that actually got people interested in the Xbox One initially. And it also came to Xbox 360 a month later. Well, that deflates a lot of excitement. Even when the game is coming to Xbox One, just knowing a 360 version existed, well, nice for 360 users, it kind of made you think, like, is this game gonna be a compromised experience on Xbox One because they had to consider the fact it was coming to 360 as well? The crew came to PS4, Xbox One, and Xbox 360. Not the PS3, I just thought that was kind of funny. Call of Duty Black Ops 3 made its way to the last generation consoles. Multiplayer only. These things are a stand-up routine. Laugh. Persona 5 released on the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 in 2017, which is insane. I mean, many times games release on older platforms like that due to kept promises. This was an era of long development and crowdfunding, so when game projects were proposed and took years to actually come out, and a 360 version was promised when the 360 was actually alive, so developers promised a 360 version of Mighty Number 9, you bet your ass they kept that promise. They made Mighty Number 9. Though as time went on, many games that were planned to appear on previous generations just end up not working out. Either they figured the amount of effort it would take to port their game over wouldn't be worth it based on the current install bases, the game was just too intense to run well, or they just didn't feel like it anymore. Mortal Kombat X, Mad Max, Dying Light, Shantae, Half Genie Hero, last gen versions were planned but ended up being cancelled. But Little Big Planet 3 released on PS3. Why? It's not like Sony was doing a ton of PS3 games releasing right alongside PS4 versions. Like, there were so many PS3 games released the year of the PS4. They could have put Gran Turismo 6 on the PS4, Ratchet & Clank Into the Nexus, Puppeteer, Slife Thieves in Time, God of War Ascension. No! Little Big Planet 3! That's the only one that needs to be on both. Hey, they did us a favor. The PS3 wouldn't be the PS3 without Little Big Planet 3 in 2014.
So these are all sort of neat. They exist. It's kind of fun. They all run and look worse than their next-gen counterparts. No fucking way. But it's sort of cool to see these games I know of as PS4 titles running on hardware released in 2005. But sometimes, developers go a different route and decide to make exclusive versions of games to run on old systems. I believe this is referred to as stupid. These are sort of cross-gen. I mean, they are and they aren't. Exclusive versions of games for the previous generation. Interesting tactic. And I think Ubisoft takes the cake here for most effort put into a dog shit idea. It's 2014 and Assassin's Creed Unity is releasing for PS4, Xbox One, and PC, and PS4, Xbox One, and PC only. I gotta say, I'm pretty surprised Ubisoft was that quick to make Assassin's Creed a current-gen only game. The last entry, Black Flag, was on everything because it was a launch title for the new consoles, and the next year, bam!
only for the new consoles. But that was because they created an exclusive Assassin's Creed game for the previous gen, Assassin's Creed Rogue, released on the same day as Unity. These are two separate games you need two separate generations of hardware to experience. They did this as an experiment. It was hard for publishers to give up support on this generation because it lasted a lifetime and these systems had huge install bases. They were worried that loads of players were still on 360 and PS3 and would either miss out on the latest Assassin's Creed or wouldn't buy a watered down port. How about an exclusive one just for them? See if there's a reason to keep both of these platforms around. I don't know. This was well into the Assassin's Creed fatigue. People were already getting tired of a new game every year, so what does Ubisoft do? Release 2 Assassin's Creeds on the same day. God, I'm so fucking sick of peanut butter, I wish I had 2 jars instead of 1. I just view this as a waste of development. The team that made this could have made anything but Assassin's Creed for either current or previous gen systems, but no. They had to make another game and a series milked dry on consoles nobody cared about anymore. A similar situation happened with Call of Duty when World at War released for Xbox 360, PS3, and Wii, a separate version released on the PlayStation 2, World at War Final Fronts. A completely separate game. I still don't understand the point of this. Obviously, World at War would have worked on the PS2. It worked on the Wii, so what was the big deal? This was probably them testing the waters, just like with Assassin's Creed Rogue, see if the PS2 audience still cared about new exclusive games in 2008. But still, at that point, why not put Final Fronts on the Wii as well, or port it to the PSP? They put all this development time into a version that just released on the PlayStation 2. Sonic Unleashed on the Wii and PS2 released alongside the 360 and PS3 versions. They are completely different games. They follow roughly the same plot and structure, but the levels are all different, so it's like, is this a cross-gen game or just straight up different entities? Sonic the Hedgehog released on the Sega Master System and Sega Genesis. What is this? Again, 2 completely different games. Is this cross-gen? One of my favorite weird examples is Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Much like the mainline Pokemon games, the first game was released as 2 separate versions, Blue Rescue Team and Red Rescue Team. Both on different consoles on the same day. Blue was on the Nintendo DS, Red was on the Game Boy Advance. How many people went, I can and I can also with that? I think that's confusing if anything. Cross-gen games became more and more common as the years went on. They were mostly reserved for the kids games, but lately, look at this. So many games releasing on the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, Xbox One, and the 4th generation of Xbox consoles. It's becoming commonplace for big AAA games to release across generations like this. One of the greatest games of the generation is debatable whether it's a part of this generation or not, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This was almost an exact repeat of the Twilight Princess situation. The game was announced for Wii U, got delayed so many times, its completion date lined up with the Nintendo Switch's release. Oh god, they didn't mean to! It made for one hell of a launch title and swan song for the Wii U. I mean, the reason for this game being cross-gen wasn't necessarily to give it the biggest install base possible, rather, it was out of obligation. They announced they were working on Zelda for Wii U all the way back in 2013. People bought Wii U's just for this game. They had to release it for the system. And it works. There's really not any cool differences between versions like there was with Twilight Princess on the GameCube and Wii. It's sorta neat to see the Wii U gamepad show up in the menus instead of Switch controllers. You can play the game directly on the gamepad, though the original plan was to have the map always down there. That would have been a cool feature exclusive to the Wii U version, but that was scrapped. Both releases look nearly identical. From my experience, the Switch version seems to look and run a bit better, but they're pretty much the same. It's probably a lot of shiny new device bias. Of course the Switch version looks better. Don't tell me I wasted $300. Well, technically, in some ways, the Wii U version actually loads faster. Again, not by much though. But when we hit the home button and then go back to the game, it needs to reload on Wii U. We also have to install a ton of data, so while the Wii U may have been the original platform for the game, it was definitely pretty optimized for the Switch. Yeah, it's a lot of work to put your game on multiple platforms. I should know, I've played Bubble Bobble. I know everything about video games, but that doesn't stop some franchises from going on every platform conceivable. For example, the LEGO games. You can always count on these being something you call an exterminator for. Just Dance. Yep, multiple entries released on the Nintendo Switch, the Wii U, and the Wii all at the same time, in addition to Xbox 360 and PS3 releases. And then Just Dance 2020 released on just the current platforms and the Wii. To be fair, it made sense not to make a Wii U version. I mean, you can play the Wii game through the Wii U. It's not like you'd be missing out that year. And of course, we can't forget, where's the Wii U version? The sports games. FIFA 2005 ended up being released on the PlayStation 1 in 2004. FIFA 19 released for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 in 2018. But this one was the Legacy Edition, which meant EA didn't care, and this is just FIFA 17 or something with an updated player roster. But then FIFA 14 in 2013 released for the PS2. Same Legacy Edition tactic of an older FIFA game re-released, but this game came out for the PS3 and PS4, as well as the PSP and PS Vita. The Wii Not the Wii U, though. This is ridiculous. But look at how many versions existed. That's almost as crazy as... No, this is pretty sane. Sports games have sort of settled down in terms of platforms supported. Madden barely goes outside of the PlayStation and Xbox consoles anymore and jumped out of the previous generation decently quickly. Persona 5 came out for the PS3 more recently than Madden did. The Madden of the new generation. Cross-generation games are undoubtedly good for the consumer, not forcing everybody to spend hundreds of dollars on a new system to play a game that can technically work perfectly fine on the console they already have. But I'd be lying if I said their existence didn't make things less exciting when a new generation comes along. Why should I care? I can play this game on a fucking tree trunk. What's there to be excited about? I think it just goes to show that the games are truly what matters here. You shouldn't buy a new console just because it's the new console. You should buy it because there are meaningful experiences to have on there. If the games on that platform are already available on the platform you already have, you don't need the new console. But Sackboy has a 5 on the box now. I said don't buy the console, you can buy the games. Hey all, Scott here. Imagine today's events occurring in the past. What would it be like to live in an era prior to this very moment? I wonder what I'm gonna say in 5 minutes.
What the hell is this? Why is it good? We need to go a hint closer to utter dog shit. I said a hint.
The year is 1987. This is what we call a video game.
That was a short game of 20 questions.
At the time, things could only go up graphically. They were trying all kinds of 3D styles. Some games you could hear crystal clear sound in with voice acting, and other games were movies you could slightly interact with. The future was looking bright. Imagine what video games will look like 30 years from now. Holy f***, it's wider? What's the main driving force behind new video game consoles? Better graphics. I'll let you shoot me in the foot if you look nice. We all want our video games to look better each and every generation. But sometimes it's fun not to care. The graphical style of older games were simpler, no doubt, but there was a certain magic to it. That old school Atari 2600 look. It's crude, it's not great, but there's something to be said about making the simplest of art understandable to the player, making it obvious to them that these are aliens in 4 pixels or less. It's oddly beautiful. Let the record show, I'm also legally blind. But when we move into the 8-bit and 16-bit eras, these are much easier to find worth in. A similar style of making the most out of limitations, but this feels more like actual art somebody drew that was then squished into a cartridge. 16-bit art is so much better too. This was taking pixel art and adding so many more colors and details, and the music of this era, oh my god, it may be a bunch of bleeps and bloops, but it's all organized in such catchy and mesmerizing ways. Again, it's so cool how they would make something so beautiful out of something so limiting. And due to how simple things were, it was easier to immediately understand what make these games tick. Modern games are so full of cutscenes and 3D eye candy that it can sometimes distract you from the core of the game, which might not be that great. Because of this, the style of older games has never really died out, not only because less powerful handheld systems kept 2D pixelated jargon alive while the home consoles tried shoving fucking polygons down our throat, but because people legitimately like these art styles, this music, these simpler, more get-to-the-chase type games. It doesn't just remind people who peaked in high school of better times, some just like this kind of stuff. The problem is, most think older games look outdated. And 99% of the time, they would be correct. So to get modern gamers to play the classics, you might just have to remake them, giving them new visuals with all kinds of crazy effects, a fully orchestrated soundtrack, even more content. But like I said, many still value this older style of game, while some want these older games to be recreated for the modern age. What if we took this modern thing and tried to recreate it using this rock? This is a demake, remaking a game on worse and or older hardware, possibly generations older, or it's just made in the style of older titles. It's interesting to see how a modern game works when it's met with the limitations of living in 1994. It doesn't. Most remakes are fan-made. Makes sense. If Nintendo isn't gonna put Smash Bros. On a Game Boy, damn it, I'm gonna. One of the most famous examples of this is Halo 2600, a remake of Halo for the Atari 2600. Now, to be fair, this is a more completely different game in comparison to straight up playing Halo on Atari. Like, how would you even begin to port these graphics over? Well, we can do the color green. No, this is turning the concept of Halo's story, characters, and some of the gameplay and trying to make it work as an old school Atari game. It's pretty neat to think about how you recontextualize things that have only ever been seen in first-person 3D into a 2D sprite, and not just any 2D sprite, a bad one. However, I think what made this game truly famous in the demake realm was the fact it was made by one Ed Fries. He was actually the vice president of Microsoft's game publishing division up until 2004, so can you really consider this a fan-made demake when it was made by a Microsoft employee who worked with the Halo series? Well, this is far from official. Fries released this in 2010, 6 years after he left Microsoft, and even if he was still working at Microsoft when he made this, it was just a hobby project to attempt to make a Halo game for the Atari 2600.
But it's more official than pretty much any other unofficial demakes, so you gotta give it credit. I think the Atari demakes are pretty interesting because I feel like you can make most games conceptually work on an NES or SNES with little issue. I mean, they would look and play wildly different, but I could fully imagine demakes of The Last of Us and Dark Souls on those platforms. These consoles can produce high quality gameplay and stories. Atari is a different beast. You pretty much have to rethink a game and turn it into a high score kind of deal. But fans have shown loads of talent by producing demakes of Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. Mario is pretty impressively close. Zelda has more in common with a loading screen, but these are fan creations, the video game False Prophet. What about official demakes? Well, they aren't the most common, but when they happen, they really double dragon on Atari 2600. Gesundheit. You truly see the power of the demake with Atari. I mean, this thing runs on pencil lead. How are you gonna make Donkey Kong Jr. work on Atari? You don't. Now, Atari seems to be the furthest we can go back in terms of demaking, but how much simpler can we get? It's dangerous to ask me words. So we have Double Dragon on Atari or Double Dragon the LCD handheld game. Pick your poison. I feel that many would disagree with the notion that these are demakes, but if you consider Halo 2600 to be a demake, I think these fit the bill. This was the cheap alternative to buying a real man's handheld. The Tiger Electronics LCD games took the full name and branding of arcade and console games and made calculators out of them. These often are nowhere near replacements for the actual things, rather reinterpretations of the classics that can be displayed in a sticky notes worth of screen real estate. And damn it if that isn't a demake. The Tiger games are pretty gross. They take the bare minimum concept of these games and make this a high score based, overly simplistic romp that's just an endurance test. Hey, see how long you can use your thumbs. Nintendo had their own LCD games with the Game & Watch brand, in which they themselves converted their games over to. These, however, are much more well designed. They're still simplistic, but there's more of an addictive challenge to these compared to what I found in a morgue. And when the game they were demaking for Game & Watch was too complicated for the LCD screens, they would make something entirely new for them, like with Super Mario Bros. And Zelda. The LCD demake is probably as low as we can go, unless you count charades. So, instead of pathetic, let's try for fucking bizarre, my new store. Sega hit it big with the Sega Genesis here in North America. With their previous console, the Sega Master System. Look at it. Does it look like it would do well here? Maybe Brazil. The Master System was a long-lasting success in Europe and Brazil. They just loved grid paper and failure. While the console ended in 1992 here in the States, it lived on for years longer in other regions, especially in Brazil, where it has yet to be officially discontinued.
Maybe they just forget.
But because of this success, demakes of popular Sega Genesis games were common for the platform. Sonic came over, though more so in specially designed games for the Master System. Streets of Rage, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, because good versions of those games weren't good enough. But the demake I want to focus on here is Street Fighter 2. Yeah, Street Fighter 2 on the Sega Master System, because damn, does that sound good right about now?
Round one, fight!
That hits the spot. Honestly, for a version of Street Fighter 2 on an 8-bit console, it's pretty good. I mean, character moves are missing, so it's not like a full-fledged port. It's not like this is the full Street Fighter 2 experience, just a little worse. Yes, Banana was run over by my cart, but it's still the full experience. This simply does the job for Master System owners who wanted Street Fighter 2 and not much else. Graphically, I think this looks pretty damn good. Audioly, I too enjoy making soundtracks with elevators. For what it's worth, Street Fighter 2 on Master System is fascinating. It only released in Brazil in 1997, and Capcom greenlit it because they were duped into thinking this was a Sega Genesis version of the game. The developer then revealed they were playing on the Master System, and they said, wow, this fucking stunk for the Genesis, but for the Master System, this could be worse. It was approved. Well, I'd rather play this than the Game Boy version, which that's its own league of demake. The portable variant of a game was almost always lesser in every way. But just like Street Fighter on Master System, it could be worse. I think many Game Boy demakes are fairly impressive. I mean, DuckTales on this thing is damn close to DuckTales how God intended. Developers had to choose whether to make a version of the game designed with the Game Boy in mind, or just try to cram funny shit in the car. It's a balancing act. Would it really be easier to make a Lion King game for the NES, or just take the SNES game and downgrade the hell out of it? This looks unnatural. Like, I feel like if I would play this as a kid, I would still think to myself, this feels like a downgraded version of something that already exists. I mean, designing a game from scratch for a system is a lot of work, but it's also really hard to get the Lion King on SNES to run on the NES. You know the old saying. The NES got a few demakes. I'd consider Mighty Final Fight to be one of these. This is a Final Fight game made exclusively for the NES. It's a retelling of the first game's story, so I would consider this a demake. Take that, Senate. However, everything else is really this game's own thing. If you consider Final Fantasy VII Remake to be a remake, give Mighty Final Fight a chance. This is definitely more of a spoof on the original. They made all the characters children and built it entirely for the NES. It was definitely meant to give NES owners a Final Fight experience while also making sure could stand on its own, so they made it a joke. I'm a proud NES owner. My new Final Fight is its own thing and isn't bogged down by the limitations of the console it's on. Rather, Capcom used the limitations to their advantage while creating this thing. This is how you do a demake, and it might not even qualify as one. That's why we go back to the Game Boy line with Game Boy Color and Advanced demakes. Finally, I can play Grand Theft Auto portably. I never said I was happy with my life. For some reason, developers constantly tried to take these big console experiences and shove them on the GBC. Resident Evil was being worked on, and while it was canceled, looking at what was accomplished, it's impressive and concerning. Think about how advanced society would be if we didn't spend so much time porting Resident Evil to Game Boy. I mean, this looks like it's straight up Resident Evil, but what ended up releasing was Resident Evil Gaiden, something more original for the system. They still try to make it as full-fledged of an RE game as it could be, including this rhythm game combat mechanic to incorporate first-person shooting, which is honestly pretty clever. And of course, GTA 2. I'm sure not many people knew this was a thing, on top of the fact the first game is on here as well. In fact, that worked on the original Game Boy. These are like the coolest items at an antique mall. Absolutely jaw-dropping, but you couldn't pay me to lick them. These are really not great versions, but just the fact they even resemble a Grand Theft Auto game, I think is enough. Were you really expecting to pop GTA 2 into your Game Boy Color and be enthralled? No, this game was created with the intent of people saying Grand Theft Auto on Game Boy Color and nothing more. But thankfully, Grand Theft Auto on Game Boy Advance is another story. And most of the joy from this game comes from the fact I'm gutting people on 2 AA's. But this is a legitimate Grand Theft Auto with not a ton of concessions made. This wouldn't be considered a demake, however, considering it's a completely original entry in the franchise. Now, Pac-Man World, that just got diagnosed. The Game Boy Advance was filled with multi-platform games that were completely different from handheld to console. I was definitely expecting this to be a 2D platformer based on the PS1 game. Was I ever gleefully disappointed? Hey, they took the PS1 game and transformed it into a 2D sprite paradise. Is it better this way? Well, it depends on if you like dog shit. See, this is the biggest issue with demakes. It feels like you're punching down. Well, the Game Boy Advance version of Super Sponge isn't as good as the PlayStation one. Well, duh. Of course, what makes these games special is seeing how they convert elements that could only be done on the more powerful systems. Sometimes they whittle them down to their core. Konami couldn't really port the first Silent Hill to Game Boy Advance, or they could, they just knew it wouldn't be pretty. So they converted it into a visual novel, released only in Japan. See, while I would have loved to try Silent Hill on Game Boy Advance, we know it would have stunk. Sometimes developers have to make these calls. Should they demake the game for lesser hardware or create something more suited for it? Because even if they work on lesser hardware, I think I, alongside many others, care more about seeing it just exist, not necessarily if it's just as good or better than the source material. However, that can happen sometimes. Dark Void was a game, thanks for asking. One of the most forgettable and generic games from the Xbox 360 PS3 era. It was done by Capcom, but it was just so lifeless and lame. Just look at this cover, look at this name. Without the title, would anybody have gone, oh yeah, that's a Dark Void? It's just an underwhelming third-person shooter that completely got overshadowed by its spin-off on Nintendo DSiWare. Everybody has that more successful cousin. Dark Void Zero isn't necessarily a demake, but it has the spirit of one. The concept here is, what if Dark Void wasn't an original game? Turns out it was a reboot or sequel to a lost Capcom NES game. You gotta hand it to them, they truly ran with this idea, even putting a fake history lesson in the electronic manual. Totally giving an excuse as to why it's on a dual screen handheld, because it was on the PlayChoice 10 dual screen arcade machine. They even got Jimmy Fallon in on the idea that this was, in fact, originally an NES game. When they break out the talk show host, everybody goes, oh shit. On that day, all Late Night with Jimmy Fallon viewers bought Dark Void Zero. The game itself actually gives off a lot of 80s Capcom vibes. Comparing it to the real-life Dark Void, it kind of feels like how Bionic Commando on NES compares to Bionic Commando on Xbox 360. What an insult. The NES style is prime for demake territory. It's more impressive to demake for Atari, but demaking a modern game for NES, well, it just might be playable. Namco demade Pac-Man Championship Edition, turning it into something worthy of being on an NES cartridge. It was included in Namco Museum Archives Volume 1, and Jesus Christ, it might just be better than the original. To be fair, the original Pac-Man Championship Edition is good, but its aesthetic reminds me so much of the superior Championship Editions DX and 2 that it's really hard for me to go back to it. Championship Edition on NES oddly feels fresher even though it looks ass old. It's so addictive, and I think having this gameplay more zoomed in makes everything feel faster. It legitimately feels like its own experience, and honestly, if I had to choose between the two versions, I'm going NES. Retro City Rampage originally started development as an NES demake of Grand Theft Auto. It's a good thing they changed course. While it's obviously inspired by GTA and NES games, the final release is more than that. It's not GTA, and it couldn't run on an NES. But you could still look at it as a spiritual demake. The developer made sure you didn't have to look far for the actual one. Included in the Wii release is ROM City Rampage, a version of the game that runs on NES. Plus, they made a version for MS-DOS on a floppy disk. These people scare me. These are the fun demakes. They bring games to garbage hardware because Now, downgraded ports, you could totally consider demakes. Doom on Nintendo Switch? Well, they technically did demake it, but that's not really too fun to discuss. Like, here's Rayman Origins on Xbox 360, now on Wii, now on 3DS. How did they do it? Oh man, they must have found the Gaussian blur effect. But the demaking spirit of going far back is still alive and well. Fans do it all the time. Final Fantasy VII on NES, Super Smash Land on Game Boy, but even Nintendo does it. Their prototype for Breath of the Wild was an NES game. They made Breath of the Wild for NES, and then made Breath of the Wild. Well, this is just a remake. I mean, they are super guilty of demakes in general. Remember the great Nintendo 3DS Wii U ports of 2016 and 17? Yes, Hyrule Warriors Legends. It runs. This is disgusting. I have no idea how anybody played this game legitimately on 3DS. Of course, it runs better on new 3DS models, but so would Molasses. Doesn't make it fast. I don't care. To me, this game just doesn't belong here. This gives off Lion King NES vibes, just a sense of this not belonging. Everything feels off. Super Mario Maker for Nintendo 3DS, I think, feels more justified, and it's still pointless. That's an insult to Mario Maker and an even bigger one to Hyrule Warriors. You can never upload stages with this version. You can only play stages that were uploaded from the Wii U version. At the very least, if they let you transfer stages you made to the Wii U to then upload, it would still be stupid, but at least there would be a way. No, there's no point to any of this, though it's still very charming to see this game run on 3DS. I just love how they had to downgrade New Super Mario Bros. U from the Wii U to this platform when New Super Mario Bros. 2 was on it and looked fine. They could have used these assets. No. It doesn't look not fine enough. The new Super Mario Bros. U art style on 3DS is amazingly pixelated, and it's funny because this is the art style they chose to represent on the box. Well, Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World is a great conversion. It looks and plays great, and I find it very charming how they converted the 3D world map into a 2D one. While the 3D map is cooler on the Wii U version, the 2D one on 3DS just flat out makes more sense. This is a 2D platformer after all. Regardless of if these are good versions of the games, demakes are amazing. They may not be more fun to play, they may just be f***ing putrid, but they're just so damn interesting to analyze, every last one of them. To see how a game as massive as Breath of the Wild would work on NES, or just seeing Hyrule Warriors do something it shouldn't, I love seeing games represented in a different way than the norm, and these demakes help you to appreciate the game design. Without all those fancy 3D graphics, most of these games still hold up at their core. In some cases, they can be better not bogged down with cutscenes and loading screens. And it gave us a chance to play Rayman Arena on the PlayStation 1. Yeah, this is weird. So Rayman Rush is a demake of Rayman Arena for PS1. It removes modes and just focuses on this racing game mode. That's it. But even though it released after Arena came out in Europe, it released before Arena did here in North America. So if you live in Ohio, is this a demake or is Rayman Arena a remake? What about Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition? This is a demake of Final Fantasy 15 for mobile phones. It uses a cutesy new art style and is played from a top-down perspective, but follows a shortened take on the same story. But man, they just oversimplified so much here. As a mobile game, it really likes it when you win, and the game just feels kind of mindless to me. At this point, you're better off just watching Final Fantasy 15 cutscenes on your phone. But then the demake got a remake with Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition HD. You can finally play this on Xbox One, or play Final Fantasy 15, your choice. To be fair, there's merit to both of these games. A lot of people didn't like Final Fantasy 15, so you've got Pocket Edition, but a lot of people don't like Pocket Edition, so it's truly a matter of preference. Except on Nintendo Switch, where this is the only Final Fantasy 15 you've got.
Because who needs bullshit when you have dog shit? Hey y'all, Scott here. Poverty! No thanks. I have my favorite way to spend $1,000 right here, and it has all my favorite console games available on it. There are so many great console games to play here. I can play Sonic.
Ready? I'm about to show you something terrifying. I already pissed myself. The idea of having one singular product that can do really anything you want, play movies, music, go online, make calls, send text messages, and play video games was something dreams were made of. I don't need a DVD player, iPod, or physician because the smartphone does it all. Yes, iPhone, Android, Windows Phone. Smartphones were cool back in the day, especially when they were more of a luxury rather than a necessity. Yeah, this thing has a 12 megapixel camera, who gives a shit? Pretty obvious we take all this for granted now, but back then the idea of having something this tiny just to watch movies on was mind-blowing. I remember seeing the first iPhone commercials and I was like, this looks absolutely amazing. It starts at $500. That's hilarious. Like, no thanks, I don't need to touch Fandango. However, these things started to get way more affordable as time went on. I was personally weaned on an iPod Touch, the classic iPhone without the phone, i.e. the iPhone for an 8th grader. This thing was awesome. I could play all these movies and TV shows and songs and download all these apps and games. But with smartphones lowering in cost, I was finally able to get an iPhone 4 in 2012, and the magic of this all-in-one super thin and tiny device
kind of wore off by then. However, as new models kept coming out every year, the iPhone and other smartphones increasingly had more and more potential when it came to graphically intensive apps. You could run things on these devices that were originally unheard of to be played on such a small guy. Because of that, developers were able to port over some of their games from home consoles onto smartphones, and that's how some of the magic of the all-in-one nature of the iPhone initially came back into play for me. I can play Grand Theft Auto 3 on my phone on the school bus. That's amazing!
Console games on mobile devices. This is a topic I have a lot of experience with. Back in my high school days, I was super keen on having everything possible on my iPhone at all times. Just so then, when I'm bored, then I have all my favorite console games available on this thing and the third season of Wings, I'm set. The idea of having all these games originally from home consoles on my smartphone at all times with no extra accessories or anything needed, and just being able to whip out my phone and play GTA San Andreas whenever I wanted to, that was amazing. But it also didn't work out as well as I wanted it to.
My high school years were from the Wii U's launch in 2012 to Star Fox Zero's release in 2016. The rest was a blur. But I do know from the start, a fair amount of kids had smartphones. By the end, I mean, everybody owned one. What, you didn't want to be called a fucking loser? Because of that, during my high school years personally, teachers just kind of gave up on regulating cell phone usage. I mean, like, of course you couldn't use them during a test or during a lecture, but when the teacher was just sitting at their desk or during study hall, hell yeah, man, break out puzzle bits. I was never a huge mobile gamer, but because of high school being worthless and having so much downtime during classes in study hall specifically, those were the years I played mobile games the most, and I noticed the most popular ones were always stupid simple. Stuff like Flappy Bird, Trivia Crack, these dumb games. Geometry Dash, Jetpack Joyride, Subway Surfers, Flappy Golf, the best one. I mean, everybody played games on their smartphones, so obviously the mobile market was something all the big game developers looked at back in 2011 saying, well, we know what we're doing tonight. All of these companies acted like the future of gaming was going to be on mobile. Consoles are dying, this was where the money was. I mean, to be honest, back then, I wouldn't blame them for thinking this. An iPhone 4S could run Infinity Blade 2, that's still a pretty decent looking game today and was made by Epic Games basically just to show off how powerful the iPhone could be for gaming. These things could run fairly intensive games and were owned by basically everybody on the planet, so yeah, back then it made sense for some of them to think about shifting focus to mobile. Why make a new Mega Man for consoles when you can make whatever the hell this was? As time went on, however, the more these console developers made games for mobile devices, it was apparent they didn't really know why people played mobile games. They just kind of made either dumbed down versions of their franchises or just mobile versions of console games. Like, they just thought, well, we have this well-known IP, we put this on a platform with an install base of hundreds of millions of users, and there we go, we win. It's pretty obvious the App Store isn't nearly as simple as they thought it was. It's a ridiculously complicated ecosystem. Just because everybody owns a smartphone doesn't mean your game will do nearly as well as it would do on console sometimes. Newcomer developers who only really made smartphone games ended up overshadowing the big guys like EA and Capcom. These guys developed simple, intuitive games made for touchscreen controls, while EA just kind of barfed out Dead Space for iPhone. Of course, now, a lot of big-name developers have figured out the mobile space, which is why we don't see a mobile version of Rayman 2 anymore, we see Rayman Jungle Run. These console game conversions really didn't suit the mobile market, and they've died out considerably over the years. Like I said, I used to be stupid into the idea of playing these games on my Wonder Slab, so I would generally download any big home console to iPhone game I could find, normally if they were on sale. However, after scouring through my previously purchased apps, most of these games are lost to time. They've been delisted from the App Store or are no longer supported by the current version of iOS. That's a good sign. Just a few of the ones that are no longer available that I remember. Dead Rising Mobile, this stunk. Clunky and the draw distance of the zombies was just garbage. This was a situation where they could barely do Dead Rising on mobile, but they probably should have waited until they could kinda do Dead Rising on mobile. Burnout Crash, yeah, this was the Burnout game that came out where people said that's not Burnout. Crash mode was one of the most fun parts of these games, just trying to create the biggest crash you can. Burnout Crash is basically this entire mode, but from an overhead perspective and at a much slower pace, which takes a lot of, if not most of the fun out of Crash mode. The mobile version was pretty similar to the console releases on Xbox Live Arcade and PSN, and I'd argue this worked fairly well as a mobile game. It didn't make it a great game, but it felt well suited for mobile. The Simpsons Arcade, not The Simpsons Arcade, The Simpsons Arcade. This was a reimagining of the original Konami game from 1991. It's obviously based off of the idea of that game, but it's not the same, and it kind of feels more like a scam calling it The Simpsons Arcade. They knew what they were doing, and I'm sure tons of people downloaded this expecting to play the original arcade game and went, oh. Resident Evil 4 Platinum. I know I just totally dogged on Dead Rising Mobile, but for Resident Evil 4 on the iPhone back in 2009, I mean, it works as well as you'd expect it to. I think Dead Rising was far more subpar. This wasn't a good way to play Resident Evil 4 and felt more like Capcom saying, look what we can do, we can put Resident Evil 4 on your phone, we're fucking crazy. They obviously did it to milk Resident Evil 4 for all it's worth, to release a big name game like this on the iPhone, to get attention. They didn't release it because they thought the game would work well on the iPhone. But it was fairly novel to have a somewhat faithful mobile version of this game, and it worked to some extent. There was also Resident Evil Mercenaries Versus, a game more suited for quick mobile gameplay in my opinion. Battlefield Bad Company 2! That wasn't the worst. That's just scratching the surface of all the junk that's been taken down. There was stuff like Mirror's Edge, which was a 2D platformer. Yeah, that's not Mirror's Edge. Driver, that blew. Guitar Hero, that was actually pretty good. Lego Harry Potter, Doom, Wolfenstein, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. You'd think that by now, the console games that were left up on the App Store would be fairly high quality. I mean, they must have left them up for a reason. Well, joke's on you, I just bought Devil May Cry 4 Refrain. This was released back in 2011, and I have no clue why Resi 4 and Dead Rising were taken down, but this lives on. DMC4 Refrain is fundamentally a super toned down version of DMC4. And first, let me say, Devil May Cry wasn't the first series I wanted on the iPhone. We have a fake analog stick and a vast array of fake buttons. Comparing it side by side with the console version, it covers some of the same ground, but overall it's a much slower, dumbed down, clunky alternative. Story is told through text only, models are at a far lower resolution. This feels like a relic of the past, a mobile game from back in the day that somehow is still available to purchase. The whole touchscreen analog stick or D-pad sort of thing just doesn't work the greatest, but it varies from game to game. There are some games which are just an absolute train wreck to play with a touchscreen, but then there are others which work surprisingly okay, though they're still not great. You get no tactile feedback, and your fingers almost always cover the screen, making it hard to see everything. You're controlling your character with glass, you can get used to it. I mean, it's obvious these games weren't made with a control scheme like this in mind. Now to be fair, the Sonic the Hedgehog games with this control layout work pretty alright. Most of the time in 2D Sonic games, you're just holding forward and hitting jump. It's not nearly as precise or involved as other platformers, plus you only use one button, so touchscreen controls, while not ideal, work fine enough. Sonic 1, 2, and CD were all released on mobile, courtesy of Christian Whitehead, who worked on these versions and then upgraded to developing Sonic Mania. He really hit it out of the park with these re-releases, making them widescreen, giving them higher frame rates, new playable characters. Sonic 2 featured Hidden Palace Zone, a stage that was cut from the original game. These are the best ways to play these classic games. And 1 and 2 are only available on mobile. The Sonic CD remaster came out on consoles. I don't know what the deal with 1 and 2 are. Yes, the best versions of Sonic 1 and 2 deserve the best place to play them. A fucking phone. Now, Sonic 1 and 2 were actually originally released on mobile years before they were updated to be the Christian Whitehead versions. Yeah, these weren't great. Sonic Spinball was originally on the App Store, but was later delisted. Damn it! But thankfully, the mobile ports of Sonic 4 remain. Sonic 4 Episodes 1 and 2 aren't great games. These were released alongside the console releases of their respective episodes, and weirdly enough, they fully updated Sonic's model at some point in Episode 1. And honestly, I think because of this, Sonic 4 Episode 1 on mobile now looks better than the console versions. The original release looked perfectly fine in terms of being a mobile version of Sonic 4, as Sonic's model was a bit blocky, but now it looks pretty decent. Doesn't help the fact that it's still, Sonic 4. But if you want to play this game, the mobile release is better than I remember. I do think the touch controls are way worse here than the Christian Whitehead re-releases, but hey, it's Sonic 4, I'm not going to be playing this again, who cares? Well, thank God, you can play with tilt controls! That was everybody's problem with Sonic 4 on consoles, they listen guys. Now Sega has this new mobile initiative called Sega Forever, where they make their mobile games free, but with ads which you can remove by paying for the game. They've made a lot of their classic titles a part of Sega Forever. Tons of these were actually released a while back, much like Sonic 1, 2, and Spinball. And they were all obviously cut from the same cloth, featuring the same virtual Genesis D-pad and buttons. Now you can play them all for free with ads, which is honestly pretty cool. But they also made some more modern games and games exclusively made for mobile a part of Sega Forever. Super Monkey Ball. This was one of the first games shown off for the iPhone. If you remember, the App Store didn't make its debut until 2008, and this was one of the headlining debut games. For $10, Jesus. I remember this one never controlled very well. You had to tilt your phone and it never felt calibrated properly. And the monkey was just a 2D sprite inside a ball. Now that's resourceful. This version has since been delisted, but we have another Monkey Ball game still available, which is free, a part of Sega Forever. Super Monkey Ball Sakura Edition is pretty much just a new and improved version of the original Super Monkey Ball mobile game. Better graphics and better controls, but they still require you to tilt your phone. Why do they feel the need with every Monkey Ball mobile game to require me to tilt my phone? I get tilting a Wii remote to play Monkey Ball, but tilting the entire screen just ends up making it harder to see what's actually going on most of the time and just gives me gives me a headache. I wish they had an option to use a digital analog stick, but hey, this monkey ball game does show me ads after every level, so that counts for something. Dude, communism, yeah. Now sometimes these mobile conversions of console games can be quite a bit different from the original. Sonic Forces on the App Store is a variation of the mobile game Sonic Dash, just now with a Sonic Forces theme. The Need for Speed games are definitely a bit different from their console versions, but racing games definitely work on mobile far better than a lot of other genres. Injustice basically feels like a made from the ground up mobile version of the console release. They basically focused on swiping and tapping the screen for moves, and it works way better than if they just smacked Injustice on the iPhone. You know, if they just downgraded the graphics considerably, put a digital stick and buttons on it, and called it a day. Street Fighter 4. You know, Capcom has tried to put a lot of their fighting games on mobile, and a lot of them have been delisted over time. Street Fighter 2 Collection, Street Fighter 4, 4 Volt, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. There was this app called the Capcom Arcade, which included a ton of Capcom Arcade games, most of which were just Street Fighter 2. But here we have Street Fighter 4 Champion Edition, the only one still available on the App Store. Jesus! Everything is so damn low quality. I'm no Street Fighter aficionado, but a fighting game like this does not work very well with no actual buttons or sticks. Some games work alright with the digital control layout, and some games are Street Fighter 4. If they just had to put Street Fighter 4 on mobile, they should have gone the Injustice route and designed something from the ground up, not do a straight conversion of the console release. Also, this thing wasn't properly formatted for iPhone 10s. What are they trying to tell me? Can't see. Capcom's had a messy history with console games on mobile, and my first experience with that was with the original Mega Man 2. This got slammed in reviews, and yes, Mega Man doesn't work very well with the digital D-pad. The game had a portrait mode with this arcade frame. This was cute and garbage. There's no room for your thumbs to use the stick and buttons, it gets cramped. In landscape mode, it was tolerable for me. I remember not being able to do the bird trick, where you hold A and B after selecting a robot master and the stars turn to birds. If I held A and B in the mobile game, it just froze until I let them go. I can see where the low review scores came from. But I got fairly far in this version on a car trip. It wasn't great, but it was fine enough. Capcom delisted this one and didn't update it to work with newer iPhones. I will be dead in the ground before I delete this off my phone. However, in 2017, they released Mega Man 1 through 6 for mobile. I can play all of them. I downloaded Mega Man 1 and holy shit, this is even worse than the original Mega Man 2 for mobile. You can adjust the speed of the game, but all three of the speeds are terrible. The normal speed is very in line with how fast the original was, but the frame rate is awful. With the two faster speeds, they just feel unnatural. This isn't how I want to play Mega Man. Instead of figuring out how to make a good mobile version of Mega Man 2, or just deciding that mobile doesn't suit the game well, they make worse versions of all the NES games. I also just don't get all the small little edits they made to the game. Like, why is the health bar down in the corner now? Well, Mega Man X is on the App Store too, and holy sh**, I don't know which is worse. Why did they redo all the sprites? This looks like an online Flash game. This feels like a poor man's Mega Man X, and I really don't know why they felt the need to make everything feel so much cheaper and lamer. The original Mega Man 2 release for iPhone came out well before this version of Mega Man X. At least they retained the original graphics. Why they made this game the way it is will always perplex me. Call of Duty World at War Zombies was a big game on mobile. Instead of being a full-blown Call of Duty game, it was just the Zombies mode where you had to survive as long as possible. I played this a few times in study hall, but like any 3D iPhone game, this tore through battery life. It's been delisted and now we have Black Ops Zombies. It's pretty similar. Controls are decent enough. FPSs work far better on mobile than I would ever expect them to be honest. And it probably helped that this was specifically made for mobile and not just a straight port of a console game. Speaking of which, Rockstar has brought over tons of their PS2 era games to mobile. Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City, San Andreas, even the more obscure ones like Liberty City Stories, the PSP game that later came to PS2. Plus Bully and Max Payne. Sure, we've played downgraded to hell PS3 and 360 games, and old 2D games as well, but full-blown PS2 era games on your phone wherever you go. That was an amazing thought to me. Grand Theft Auto 3 released on the App Store back in 2011, and I immediately bought it. I picked up all the GTAs when they released on mobile, and I would start playing them for about 10 minutes and kind of stopped. These are fine versions of these games. Everything's here and they all work well. They just don't feel right or nearly as fun on the iPhone. Maybe it's the lack of actual buttons, and no tactile feedback takes a lot of the fun and fluidness out of the controls. You don't get the same impact crashing your car by moving your thumbs on a glass screen as you would holding an actual button and moving an actual analog stick. The entire layout changes when you enter a car. There's a lot of things you can do in Grand Theft Auto, and to have to focus so much on where certain buttons are when they change a fair amount, to have all this crowd up the screen, to have your fingers covering up 40% of it all, it's a bit much. I would get super excited to see these games playable on my phone, but they're just not nearly as fun to play here as they are on a console in my opinion. Chinatown Wars preceded all these games and was the first GTA on iPhone. This was a port of the DS and PSP game, and honestly, it worked a bit better than the 3D games. Being overhead and already being designed for portable devices with some touchscreen functionality in mind, made for a better mobile game in my opinion. But you know what I said when the iPhone came out. Where's BioShock? This was one of the most bizarre phone conversions out there to me. In 2014, 2K announced they put BioShock on mobile. The full game. Like, kudos to them for getting BioShock to work on mobile, but who asked for this? I need names. This is the last game I would have expected on the iPhone. A first-person shooter with an emphasis on story. I love those things on my iPod Touch. They stopped supporting it in 2017, which is unfortunate. This is a really cool oddity of a release, but I can see why it's no more. Of course, there's stuff like all the Telltale games, Minecraft, Fortnite, and various others. I actually played a lot of Ace Attorney on mobile, and stuff like Pokemon Shuffle works better on mobile than it did on the 3DS. You also have a ton of Final Fantasy games going for prices I didn't even know were possible on the App Store. But the concept of playing console games on mobile has died down a bit over the past few years, especially considering the PSP, Vita, and 3DS started to bring more and more console experiences to handhelds, and then the Nintendo Switch completely flattened any desire for console games on the iPhone. Mobile games do specific things very well. They're simple, addictive, and easy to quickly whip out, which is why now if we see a big game franchise come to mobile, it's usually more smartly designed for mobile. I've had nightmares about some digital D-pads, so it's nice to see they're not as common as they used to be. Now, you may say, for a lot of these games, if you don't want a digital D-pad, why not use a Bluetooth controller? Most of these apps support them. That is true, however, in my opinion, a lot of the appeal of something like Grand Theft Auto Vice City on your phone is the fact that you can play this wherever you go with no catches. A lot of that appeal disappears when you have to bring a controller with you places. Most of the time, console games are best left on actual consoles, and while it's cool to see some of them go portable, it's not always worth the downgrades and the control issues, which is why the Nintendo Switch is so fun, portable home console games with no control issues. Maybe lesser graphics, but hey, whatever. These were cool little oddities for a while, but their time has passed, and now it's nicer to see mobile games specifically designed for mobile. But thank God Carnival games came to iPhone. Now, like I said, you could buy a controller and set your phone up as if it was a console, but at that point, just buy a fucking Switch. But mobile phones do have a pro to them compared to the Switch. They have Atari Fit. Oh, for the love of God, I was supposed to get robbed tomorrow! Damn it! Well, my evening opened up. What am I gonna do now? I can't go, hey all, Scott here. I don't own Lasagna World Tour. False alarm. I lost everything. Well, except what the robber decided to leave. I wonder why. This is too convenient. You know what I really need to do is buy a $500 console alongside a $2,000 TV set, buy a $60 controller to play this free game for $60. Oh, fucking brilliant!
Error. Take it, you son of a bitch.
I'm not one to make bad decisions, I'm one to buy a ninth Wii U. So the idea of a person paying full price for a game you can get for $1 or free, I don't even think God planned that one out. Listen, gaming is bigger than it's ever been before, and I think a key part of that massive growth is mobile gaming. Playing games on your smartphone. It counts. I mean, based on how much playtime occurs, I think my mom is a bigger gamer than I am based on Scrabble alone, yet I'm the loser. I feel like core home console gaming and mobile gaming, however, are a bit too different. There's different design philosophies at play, and mobile games are all created to be played via just a touchscreen. So while I appreciate that mobile gaming has broadened the video game landscape and do enjoy a few smartphone titles here and there, I think home consoles and mobile work best when separated. Trailblazer. Every so often, game companies figure that because mobile games do so well, that must mean they should only make mobile games from there on out, or incorporate elements of them into their console games, or say AAA gaming is dying. All because Grandpa bought the Bird app for $1.
Oh my God, the console game industry keeps flip-flopping between accepting what it is and trying to embrace mobile. And don't get me wrong, sometimes it works out, but most of the time it's like, hey, we're gonna put this game on mobile just because mobile is huge, even though it would do 10 times better on console because that's where the target demographic is. I'm not mad about it, I'm just really fucking angry. But what about the inverse of that? What about taking a popular mobile game and putting it on a console? Whoever thought of that should get a Nobel Prize. In hell.
Listen, I have a soft spot in my heart for I don't know what else to call it, the golden age of mobile games. That period of time when the iPhone first opened its app store, come on, everybody remembers those commercials saying how there's an app for everything. When you get an Apple device with the App Store available on it, man, I'd just scroll through that thing for hours, finding all kinds of fun free apps, or I'd scrounge up enough money to spend $1 on one. Oh, the quality was horrendous for many of these apps, but it was a fun era. There was this feeling that smartphone apps could do anything. I downloaded apps that said they were universal TV remotes without any knowledge on how they'd work. They never did. Then there were the one-time gimmick apps like, ooh, a lighter. Nowadays, apps all kind of feel the same, and games are mostly free, which is cool, but they're all littered with ads. You can't do anything without a 30-second unskippable commercial blocking your way. And many of the most popular games, they all blend in. Back in 2009 or so, the most popular iPhone games were more unique. They were experiences designed specifically for the phone, and I feel like that contributed heavily to their popularity. Angry Birds was the biggest phenomenon, though it was never a favorite of mine. It was fun, addictive, and worked perfectly with a touchscreen-only device. Stretch a bird, political violence. The game originally cost 99 cents on the iPhone, $1.99 on the iPad, and there were a few releases in the series. You had the original vanilla Angry Birds Seasons, which gave you constant updates and new levels based on holidays and the time of year, and Angry Birds Rio. You know, they made a movie based on this game. I never considered this to be a trilogy, more so just variations of the original Angry Birds, but it doesn't matter because Activision did. Angry Birds Trilogy. For only $40, you can waste 37. Yeah, physical releases of the first 3 games for Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Nintendo 3DS. Strangely, Wii U, and PlayStation Vita versions came a year later, considering these were platforms that honestly worked better for Angry Birds with touchscreens and pointer controls. The main selling point of Angry Birds Trilogy is to play it on a TV. Was it worth it?
No.
Don't get me wrong, I see value in playing this game on the TV. You know, pass the controller around, try to beat each other's high scores, but it's just so clunky here. What used to be a game with the simplest control method imaginable now uses literally every face button on the controller. That is impressive. I'd say the Wii and Wii U versions make the most sense. This release is nice as it does preserve 3 of the biggest mobile games ever, some of which have been delisted and discontinued from the app stores. Yeah, I'll give this release that. It keeps the Angry Birds Rio dream alive. But no matter what, I can't look past the fact that while this is a collection of games, it's a collection of games that retail for $3 total, $6 max buying the iPad versions. In fact, Trilogy was missing some levels from the original game. Some exclusive bonus levels are included, but does that really matter with Angry Birds? It's not like these levels are vastly different enough to make you think, wow, new level designs? You don't really care about the design itself. The fun of new levels in Angry Birds is the idea you have a new box to check off. Ooh, a new stage to be and get 3 stars in? Do you really have a favorite stage in the game? Can you tell the difference between ears of corn? Because if you give me a bonus ear of corn, I'm not gonna be like, oh my god, a new corn? No, it's just, okay, it's just another ear of corn for me to eat. The bonus stages in Angry Birds Trilogy. It's a fine release. I mean, the Angry Birds series are solid games. It would have been cool to get games made specifically for consoles rather than just the mobile games all over again, and the initial price point of $40, no matter who you were, was hard to swallow. So Activision listened, and they knew a trilogy of games wasn't enough for that price point. They charged more for one. Angry Birds Star Wars for $50, released 1 year later for pretty much every console at the time. I feel like they wanted to push to be there for the PS4 and Xbox One's launch, and they knew they could guilt consumers into buying into it. But the birds will be pissed. The fact they pretty much sold a single $1 mobile game for $50 when at the very least they could have included Angry Birds Star Wars 2 in the package, considering that came out a few months prior to this console release. I'll throw Angry Birds Space in there. It's pretty dumb. Like, who the hell would buy this? Ignore that question, but disregarding all of that, Angry Birds Star Wars does offer family fun for less than most AAA games. Multiplayer is now included, which adds so much value to the game, even though it's literally just passing the controller to the other player for their turn, which you never needed a multiplayer mode to do that before, but it's a fantastic addition to a solid game. That's how some reviews of this read, and I don't get it. To be fair, I think most saw this as ridiculous, and if it actually sold well, I think we would have seen far more physical Angry Birds releases by now. They were always banking on these games luring in parents that know nothing but their kid likes Angry Birds and maybe their kid's name, all without realizing you'd spend $90 on both releases when these would all cost you $4 on the App Store. But then again, it's good to know these games will forever be preserved via these physical methods.
I'm sleeping well tonight.
Alright, enough about the pissy chicken saga. Let's talk about the best mobile game. Cut the Rope hit the scene around the same time as Angry Birds, and I always preferred it. A very simple yet engaging puzzle game. Nab all 3 collectible stars by cutting the ropes, holding the candy to get it to the monster Omnom's mouth. You know, a bunch of 9-year-olds see this game and go, oh, my childhood! But no, guys, let's give Cut the Rope more credit. I mean, I think this is so much better than Angry Birds. It's so smartly designed, and unlike that game, I remember so many of these levels. The gimmicks they employ, the sound effects, music, the visuals, and animation are phenomenal for a mobile game released in 2010. Hell, even in general, they're fantastic. And the fact this game could not work as well without a touchscreen, it just makes this one of my top mobile games of all time. If this was never a mobile game, it was just a DS game published by Nintendo, you would all eat it up. Every one of ya. But you know the old saying, if it's good, make it bad. Cut the Rope launched on the Nintendo DSi Shop channel in September of 2011. I should know, I bought it back then. I think you could all tell. I don't know, I knew I liked Cut the Rope on my iPod Touch and I wanted it on my DSi at the time, or Nintendo 3DS to be more exact. It is a pixelated, choppy as hell, dumbed down version of Cut the Rope. But it still Cut the Rope. They translated it over to the DS as well as they could, honestly. Going for the horizontal book style, it works well enough, albeit there's no reason to play this if you already had an iPhone or iPod Touch at the time. I think one of the reasons I picked this up was due to the lack of software on 3DS at the time, so I went, yeah, sure, this'll aid in my buyer's remorse. But of course, I could tell this was a heavily watered down port. I kinda wondered, why didn't they just make Cut the Rope for the 3DS entirely? Well, it's my lucky day 8 years ago. In 2013, we got Cut the Rope Triple Treat, a physical 3DS game. I thought this was an entirely new Cut the Rope game made specifically for the 3DS. Triple Treat is like Angry Birds Trilogy, 3 Cut the Rope mobile games converted to a video game system, in this case, the 3DS. The back screenshots have these 3D models of Omnom, and I thought like, okay, that must be a new bonus side game or something. Each game is played on the bottom touchscreen, with the top being a completely superfluous 3D model of Omnom. When it gets the candy on the bottom screen, it gets it on the top, so it's sort of like the top screen is an extreme close-up, though it's delayed enough to not make for a cool effect. This isn't a bad game by a long shot. It runs much better than the DSi version, plus you get 2 other games, a collection of promotional animations, leaderboards. I really do think Cut the Rope is a good puzzle game, but playing on the 3DS doesn't benefit the experience at all. If anything, it's worse due to the lesser touchscreen. For $30 at launch, again, it's a bit much. It's not like you wouldn't get $30 of use out of this thing. I mean, the back of the box boasts over 50 hours of gameplay. Yeah, I got 4 years out of my $10 box cutter. Does that make it worth $900? Sticking to the 3DS, let's try out Doodle Jump Adventures, also released in 2013 alongside a DS version, Doodle Jump Journey plus Doodle Jump for Connect for Xbox 360. Jesus, that was a big year for this stuff. Did everybody collectively go, let's make worse versions of our mobile games and charge 30 times more? Minds think alike. Doodle Jump is an endurance test. Tilt your device and see how high you can go. There's not much to it. This is one of those games you see all these adaptations and merch of because companies see it as a big phenomenon, when I think it did well because it was a simple game on the App Store during a time when people would download damn near anything if it was free. So of course it got a 3DS game and a Hot Topic t-shirt. Yeah, it's Doodle Jump, now taking place across 2 screens, which honest to God is kind of disorienting. Adventures refers to the campaign, which are literally just Doodle Jump stages with definitive ends, and that's it. Move on to the next one, basically the same thing. Is Doodle Jump Adventures worth it? Let's be fair though, sometimes the transition to consoles can go quite smoothly. Here we have Fruit Ninja Connect. Oh, he's not a ninja, he's a fruit ninja.
Oh, badass.
This is one of the best conversion ideas. Fruit Ninja was all about swiping combos of fruit while avoiding missing any and bombs, but Connect for Xbox 360 gives you the exact game, but you use your body now, karate chopping the fruit away. It's honestly one of the best uses for Connect, and is truly distinctive enough from the mobile release to be completely warranted here. Fruit Ninja for PlayStation Vita. It's literally the exact same thing as the iPhone release at the time, so bravo, it was a flawless conversion. But why do this in the first place? Oh. So, it's the exact same game, downloadable only, no new control options, featured anything, for $8. At least with Angry Birds Trilogy and Star Wars, you had the excuse of them being on home consoles for the first time.
Wait, actually, Angry Birds was made available on the PS3 and PSP stores separately as early as 2011. Almost seems like there was a push by Sony to have some popular mobile games on the PS3 because around this time, Jetpack Joyride hit the system. While overpriced and offering nothing new, these versions I think feel pretty genuine as downloadable games from this era. The same goes for Flight Control, which released on DSiWare, WiiWare, and PlayStation 3 only in Europe and Japan for some reason. No market for it in the US. In Europe, they won't shut the f up about it. Games like Pac-Man 256 released on PS4 and Xbox One after the mobile version without any microtransactions or advertisements, with controller support for just one low price, which this game works great in both contexts. As a quick pick up and play mobile game and as a fun content complete downloadable console release. It proves there's genuinely really quality stuff on mobile, stuff that can work just as great on consoles as well. Gameloft is the leading supplier of mobile games. They've always been that, just a D-grade Ubisoft clone who pumps out unoriginal, uninspired mobile ripoffs of more popular console games. A lot of their games aren't horrible or anything, but they're just nothing sacks of not. And their premier series has always been Asphalt, basically your mobile phone alternative to Need for Speed. This is a long-running series, but who gives a shit? The original Asphalt, Urban GT, and Urban GT2 released on Nintendo DS actually before cell phones, so starting with Asphalt 3, it became a completely mobile-focused series. The games like Asphalt 4 hit the Nintendo DSi shop, and Asphalt 6 the Nintendo 3DS as a launch title. Asphalt 3D. This was one of the first 3DS games I bought, mainly because it was the only game I could afford after already picking up Pilotwings Resort. After reading Oedipus Rex, I said I too should have a tragic ending. I remember not having any opinions on this game, and frankly, that's how I feel about this entire series. It's such a soulless car game. There's nothing unique about it. It gets the job done. Like if you have a pheromone release when you see a car move, sure. But Ridge Racer 3D launched right alongside the 3DS too, so it's like, why not go for that one? I'll tell you why, because Asphalt is always cheap or free. That's how they get you. Asphalt 9 was a mobile game converted to the Nintendo Switch, and it's more of the same, but this time it's free to play. Again, it's playable, it works, it does the job, but there's something about these games that always makes me feel like I'm wasting my time playing them. And I just beat Ride to Hell Retribution. Now why does Gameloft bring these games to consoles? Well, it's usually if they think they can fill a certain void. Case in point, Modern Combat Blackout on Nintendo Switch. This series is to Call of Duty what Asphalt is to Need for Speed. Who the hell likes this series? Put your damn hands down! If you want a Call of Duty-like experience on your smartphone, here you go. Call of Duty. Even the title is just a ripoff of Modern Warfare. And again, the games, they're fine, but they review surprisingly well. And I think that is entirely due to the fact that they're good for mobile games. But then when they brought it to Nintendo Switch, the cracks start to show with games like this in Asphalt when you put them on an actual console, and the only reason they put Modern Combat on the Nintendo Switch was due to the lack of Call of Duty. There was no legitimate game from the series on the platform at the time, and people wanted a first-person shooter experience like that to play. Gameloft saw the opportunity and quickly put a mobile game from 2014 on the system for $20. Take notes, Sophocles. It's not great, in fact, it feels pretty pathetic. I wish they'd put more effort into redesigning the menus of these mobile games when converting them to console. It's just so painfully obvious when something was designed for a touchscreen. And even the controls, while functional, I feel like they were designed to mimic regular FPS controls, but compensating for the clunkiness of the touchscreen, but then letting you use a controller for it. It's so hard to explain, I don't even know what I'm talking about! Unfortunately, many developers just port over mobile games to the Nintendo Switch, and it's always this really underwhelming feeling when it happens. The system was marketed as a home console, and I'll always see it as that. But when a great handful of games are just mobile ports, there's nothing special feeling about that. Being able to play a mobile game on Switch gives me no joy. There's no feeling of, look at what I'm doing, ma. To which he says, Scott, I don't care you're playing Shinsekai Into the Depths on Switch that's been on iPhone for a year. Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition was a mobile conversion of Final Fantasy 15, and instead of the actual Final Fantasy 15 on Nintendo Switch, we got this version, and I'm sad. There's nothing special about any of this, especially if these versions are replacing getting the traditional edition of the game. Then it's more of a slap in the face compared to not getting any version at all. Football Manager Touch, yeah, the stripped down mobile version of Football Manager. Xbox got a version made specifically for it, titled Xbox Edition. The Nintendo Switch, they're not even trying to hide it. And then the Pokemon spin-offs. There's a ton that release simultaneously on mobile and Switch, and they either feel out of place on mobile or out of place on Switch. And now to be fair, they normally launch on Switch first, but you can't fool me. Games like Pokemon Quest and Pokemon Cafe Mix were designed for mobile first. Just look at them. It's unfortunate because we used to get so many Pokemon spin-offs of all kinds for the Game Boy Advance, DS, Nintendo 64, GameCube, Wii, and now, while we still get some big boy spin-offs, a lot of Pokemon spin-offs are relegated to being free-to-play mobile games that get a half-ass Switch version to throw us a bone. But in reality, I think this just opens these games up to more criticism. Again, look at the differences between the review scores of Modern Combat on mobile and Modern Combat on Switch. You become a lot more critical when you play a mobile game on a console like this. But that's just a testament to how big mobile has become. It's impossible to ignore, and a franchise like Pokemon makes perfect sense for the platform. Mobile franchises become so big that we end up getting things like Puzzle and Dragons Super Mario Bros. Edition. Yeah, a mobile game turned 3DS game with an official Nintendo license on it all. I have no idea if I like how this game looks or not. Well, something like this is far more understandable becoming a retail game, especially considering it was made from the ground up for the console. Like VR spin-offs or stuff like the Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare series. Plants vs. Zombies wasn't a mobile game first, but it hit the platform way before consoles, and Plants vs. Zombies 2 is only a mobile game. I'll count it. To be honest, most versions of this game work fairly well. The touchscreen of the Nintendo DS, the version for Xbox 360 was very fine-tuned. It feels great here, but the third-person shooter spin-off, well, that does make a bit more sense for the system. But hey, what if mobile games had their own dedicated system? No. Nuh-uh. Fucking Christ, yes. Take me back to 2013 when every company was making micro consoles literally only capable of streaming Netflix, and even then some of them couldn't do that. These $100 systems were based on mobile operating systems, so they'd have some mobile games retooled to work on a TV, and in their marketing, they basically said, who needs a PS4 when you can play Crossy Road on this $99 back scratcher?
Again, it can't even do that.
Here's the thing, I think many companies don't understand what makes mobile games successful and just think, oh, that means everybody loves this, put it everywhere. Listen, man, I play Flappy Dunk on my iPhone all the time, but it's more of a nervous tick than a, oh, I love this game. I just want something to do with my fingers, stimulate my eyes for a brief moment. Does that mean I'm a big fan? No, it just means I have more to work on mentally than I thought. When Flappy Bird was the biggest sensation for no other reason than it was a bitch hard, and all the high school students and coworkers were saying, hey, I got 4 points in Flappy Bird. No, I got 10. The developer removed it from the App Store afterwards, and when Amazon got the exclusive sequel, Flappy Bird's Family, for the Amazon Fire TV, who really gave a shit? Mobile games are so much less engrossing than normal console releases. I play mobile games very infrequently, but when I do, I'm not super into them. I know they're just for quick distractions, even if they're legitimately well-designed experiences. So banking on popular mobile games to sell well in any context doesn't really work. Just because these games did well on mobile, it doesn't mean they'll elicit the same reactions on consoles. But that also holds true for console games making the jump to mobile as well. So how about if they jump back? Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. All the PlayStation 2 Grand Theft Autos were remade for mobile devices. Let me tell you, I bought Grand Theft Auto 3 immediately when that released on iPhone in 2011. I mean, that was a dream come true to be able to play a PlayStation 2 game on the go. And it 100% was that, but it just didn't feel right played on a touchscreen. Like an idiot, I proceeded to buy every Grand Theft Auto that released on mobile afterwards and always had the same reaction. But San Andreas has always been my favorite of the series, and shortly after the mobile release, a new version for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 launched, which was the mobile version. What the hell was this? I guess they wanted to do a remaster of San Andreas and just figured the mobile version was good enough, but like I said, when you do a mobile to console conversion, at least change the menus. It's so obvious when menus were designed for mobile. This just doesn't feel right. You converted a game that used the controller to work with the touchscreen, but then converted that version back to work with just the controller. I don't know why, it just feels weird. And on top of that, it's just not a good version. There's so many bugs and glitches, and the game crashes constantly. It just doesn't work well. I have no idea why they even made this. It came out after the Xbox One and PS4 for the PS3 and Xbox 360. They only remastered San Andreas and not the other games from that generation, which also got mobile ports, so this gets the same reaction nearly all these other games got from me. Why the f***?
Most mobile to console conversions inherently feel lazy, and that's just the stigma with most mobile releases. They're always seen as lesser than console ones, and sometimes they are, but sometimes they aren't. And hey, what else was I gonna do at the apartment today? Take a bath? The rumors are true. I was robbed, but if today taught me anything, it's that no matter how bad your day gets, you're doing better than the guy that bought this.